Hello everyone. I am your dark narrator here to guide you today. I know many of you use this video to help you drift off to sleep, but before you do, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also drop a comment letting us know where you're from and what time you're watching. Now settle in, get comfortable, and relax. For those of you who have never heard of Job Corps, it is a trade school run by the Department of Labor designed to help low-income young adults prepare for the workforce. They have campuses all over the country. I was one of their students, and this is my experience. I thought Job Corps was my way out. A second chance. A chance to rebuild myself after years of feeling like a failure. When I was assigned to the Cascade Job Corps Center in Washington, I didn't think much of it. It was just another government-run facility in the middle of nowhere. But when I stepped onto that campus, something immediately felt off. It wasn't just the decrepit buildings, the eerie silence of the surrounding woods, or the fact that the place used to be an insane asylum. It was something in the air, a kind of heaviness, like the walls and trees were holding their breath, watching, waiting. The campus is a patchwork of old and new. You've got the dormitories, the cafeteria, and the classrooms that look like they were slapped together in the 80s. But then there's the other stuff, the older buildings. The hospital, a hulking shell of crumbling brick and shattered windows. The watermill, its wheel frozen in time. And the crematorium with its towering smokestack that still reeks of ash on humid nights. This was sharp, chemical, and lingering. No one talked about it, but everyone noticed it. The staff would laugh it off, blaming the wind or nearby farms. I didn't know about any of this when I first arrived. All I knew was that it felt wrong. The staff acted like everything was fine, but the other students had stories. Whispers passed from bunk to bunk after lights out. When I arrived, I was assigned a room in the Challenger dorm. After filling out the required paperwork and getting my bags unpacked, I was ready to settle in for the night. They did lobotomies here, my roommate Tony told me. Back when it was the asylum. You know that hospital building by the woods? They'd experiment on the patients, mess with their brains. People said you could hear them screaming, even through the tunnels. I blinked. Tunnels? He smirked, as if he'd been waiting for me to ask. Yeah, man, they're under the whole campus. Connected everything. The asylum, the hospital, the crematorium. They use them to move things. What kind of things? I asked, though I already regretted it. Tony leaned closer as if about to whisper something to me, but before he could mutter a word, the RA burst through the door asking for me. They needed me to write an inventory of everything I brought with me to the campus. I thought Tony was just messing with me. He was that kind of guy. He loved to scare the new arrivals. But over the next few days, I started noticing things. The way certain buildings were always locked, no matter the time of day. The strange noises at night and the sound of faint footsteps echoing, even when no one was around. Then there was the hospital. Everyone said it was off limits, but no one ever explained why. The staff never mentioned it. The security guards ignored it. But at night you could see lights flicker in the windows, even though the place had been abandoned for decades. I found it odd that a supposedly abandoned hospital would have lights on 24/7. About a month into my stay at Job Corps, the first big drama happened. Everyone knows about the rumors that the campus is haunted. Well, a few student James, his girlfriend Rachel, and Lex had decided to screw around with the Ouija board. I don't know the details, but something bad happened. Something about bad energy or angry spirits. James came back terrified, so much so that he decided to leave campus that night without telling anyone. Students abandoning Job Corps isn't unheard of. It's a miserable place with controlling rules and constant strains on mental health. But this was weird. James seemed to enjoy his time here, and he didn't seem particularly superstitious. Since he was a minor, security was obligated to call the police, but they had no luck finding him. We were all disappointed to hear of James' disappearance, but we figured he had his reasons. Life continued as normal. Students would come every week while others left. Some graduated, most dropped out of the program, either for bringing contraband on campus, starting fights, or breaking some other rule. Most we never heard from again. Rachel was a quiet girl. She only really talked with James because she didn't have many friends and rarely talked about herself. She started to get really down after James left. In fact, the asshole decided to ghost her entirely. Tony and I had a silent agreement to take her in. We'd eat together, play pool, and often watch movies in the theater. Lex and his best friends, Andre and Kelsey, would also hang out with us, and before we knew it, we had an entire friend group going. Kelsey lived on third floor Whitewater. She was one of those people who seemed too smart to be stuck in a place like Job Corps. Straight A student, honor dorm kid, the type who always got picked for student ambassador stuff. She had a habit of saying she didn't believe in supernatural nonsense, but the way she carried herself told a different story. Andre was quieter, but he had a sharpness to him that made you listen when he spoke. A true leader who could remain calm and composed during the most stressful situations. He'd been at Cascade longer than any of us and claimed to know every shortcut and hidden nook on campus. And then there was Andre's opposite, Lex. Lex was unpredictable. They'd come to Job Corps after being kicked out of their house, and the combination of frustration and boredom made them reckless. The kind of person who would throw rocks at a hornet's nest just to see what happened. On one of those rare nights when the weather was calm and the staff wasn't breathing down our necks, Tony managed to snag a couple of chairs from the cafeteria, and Lex borrowed some marshmallows from the kitchen. We all gathered behind the recreational center near the edge of the woods, where the staff couldn't see us. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows on our faces. For once, everyone seemed at ease. Andre leaned back against a tree, his legs stretched out like he didn't have a care in the world. Kelsey sat cross-legged on a log, poking the fire with a stick. Lex was tossing rocks, seeing how close they could get to the flames without actually hitting them. Rachel sat quietly beside me, hugging her knees to her chest. "This place sucks," Lex said, breaking the silence. "But at least we've got free marshmallows, right?" Tony laughed. "Yeah, because that's the only perk. Forget the ancient crumbling buildings and the haunting rumors. Marshmallows make it all worth it." "Speaking of haunting," Kelsey said, raising an eyebrow, "you guys ever hear about the Whitewater ghost?" Lex groaned. "Oh, here we go." "No, seriously," she continued. "Back in the 90s, a girl supposedly hung herself in one of the bathrooms. People say you can still hear her crying on the third floor late at night." Andre snorted. "Kelsey, you don't even believe in ghosts." "I don't," she said a little too quickly. "But you know, it's a cool story." Tony leaned forward, his face illuminated by the firelight. Okay, but why'd she do it?" Kelsey hesitated. "They say she felt trapped, like she didn't belong here. She left a note, but no one ever found it. Just a rope in an empty bathroom." Rachel shivered beside me. "That's awful." Lex rolled their eyes. "You guys are so dramatic, it's just a story, like Bigfoot or aliens." "I don't know," Andre said thoughtfully. "Sometimes this place does feel heavy, like it's carrying more than it should." The fire popped, and we all fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over us. Even Lex didn't have a comeback. "So why are you here?" Tony asked suddenly, looking at Andre. "What do you mean?" Andre replied. "I mean, why'd you come to Job Corps?" Tony asked, his voice softer now. "None of us are here because life's been easy." Andre stared into the fire. "My family. I needed to do something, anything, to help them. Job Corps felt like my last chance to turn things around." Kelsey nodded. "Same, college wasn't an option and I couldn't stay home anymore. I had to get out." One by one, we went around the circle, sharing pieces of ourselves. Lex admitted they'd been kicked out of their house after a fight with their parents. Tony talked about growing up in a small town where no one believed in him. Rachel hesitated, but eventually told us about how she was heavily abused at home. She decided to run away, and on her travels, she met James. He convinced her to come here, how she didn't know what to do now that he was gone. I got the sense that she didn't have many people in her life looking out for her. When it was my turn, I swallowed hard. I was homeless before this. I thought Job Corps was my way out. Maybe it still is. Rachel reached over and squeezed my arm. "It will be." For a while, we just sat there, letting the fire burn down to embers. Despite the creepy stories and the weight of our confessions, it felt good. Like we weren't alone in this mess of a place. Like maybe we had each other. Up until now, Job Corps didn't seem like such a bad place. It wasn't until a few days later that things took a turn for the worst. It started as a joke between us, break into the hospital, see what was inside. Everyone on campus had a theory. It was still used for medical experiments. The government was hiding something. Ghosts of lobotomy patients roamed the halls. We planned it during a windstorm, knowing the cameras would be down. Power outages were frequent during bad weather, and the staff was usually too distracted to keep a close eye on things. That night, the lights flickered across campus and the rain came down in sheets. Perfect cover. We slipped through the gates and climbed through a window in the back. The second we were inside, I felt it. The air was stale, cold, and heavy. Every footstep echoed like we were walking through a tomb. The hallways were long and sterile, lined with peeling paint and rusted metal carts. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly, casting an unnatural glow on everything. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like someone had just stepped out and could come back at any moment. The first thing we noticed was the equipment. Not old, dusty relics, but modern machines, monitors, surgical tools, even an operating table. Tony, the one who'd pushed hardest for this little adventure, muttered, "This isn't right. This place is supposed to be shut down." We didn't have time to respond. A loud crash echoed from somewhere deeper in the building. We froze, listening. The sound repeated, metal scraping against tile, coming closer. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like footsteps dragging something heavy. "Let's go," Rachel whispered, but Tony shook his head. "We came this far." "I'm serious," begged Rachel. "What if we get caught? Or someone gets hurt?" "It's okay, Rachel, you have us," Andre said in a reassuring tone. Tony led us down the hallway, toward the sound. I don't know what I expected to find, maybe some kind of explanation. Instead, we found a room with glass walls. Inside, there were rows of metal gurneys, each one covered with a white sheet. The sheets were moving, slowly, almost imperceptibly, like something was breathing beneath them. Tony reached for the door handle, but before he could open it, the lights went out. Total darkness. We panicked. I don't remember who screamed first, but it set off a chain reaction. I grabbed Tony's arm and ran, dragging him back the way we came. Behind us, Andre, Lex, and Kelsey followed. We heard something, a low, guttural growl, followed by the sound of metal scraping against the floor. We didn't stop running until we were outside, back in the rain. The power had come back on and the cameras were whirring to life. We didn't care. We ran all the way back to Challenger dorm, soaked and shaking, while Kelsey retreated to Whitewater. Once we got into the dorm, we began to cool down. We thought everything was fine, but when I looked at Tony, his face dropped as he asked, "Where's Rachel?" Lex chimed in, "I thought she was with you." Tony snapped, "You idiot, we were in front of you guys. How could she be with us?" "It's going to be okay," Andre urged, "but we need to report this to security so they can make sure she's safe." We knew we would get in big trouble, but we all nodded in agreement. After informing security, we did in fact get in trouble. Each of us got an NIR. But what's worse, security informed us that Rachel had decided to leave Job Corps after that night. The others were confused on why, but Tony and I knew. She had felt abandoned. First her family, then James ghosting her. Now we left her in a haunted fucking hospital. We felt so terrible that if we hadn't been confined to our dorms for the next few days as punishment, we wouldn't have wanted to do much anyways. It had been several days since the hospital. Life went back to its strange version of normal. Students returning to classes. The monotonous routine of Job Corps dragging us through the days. But nothing felt the same. Every hallway seemed a little darker. Every corner a little emptier. People kept their distance from us, not out of malice, but out of a shared discomfort no one was willing to name. We were sitting around the campfire one evening, just trying to pretend everything was okay. Tony and I were still the ones most shaken by what happened, but no one could completely shake the feeling. It was like we all carried this weight, an unspoken thing we weren't allowed to talk about. "Have you guys noticed anything weird?" Andre asked, poking the fire with a stick. He glanced around at us, eyes darting between each of us. "You know, like, since the hospital?" Kelsey, sitting next to him, shivered and hugged her knees. "I don't know, I keep hearing things at night. It's probably just the wind, but..." "You hear that too?" Tony interjected, his voice tense. "I thought I was losing it, but I swear I hear stuff at night, like footsteps. But no one's there." The fire crackled, and for a moment no one spoke. The air was thick with the tension that had been building since the night we ran from the hospital. The shadows around the campfire flickered, almost alive in the firelight. A sharp, pungent smell started to fill the air, but we ignored it. "Where do you think she went?" Kelsey asked, voice tight. "I mean, she was gone the next day, and no one even knows why. I thought she was just staying with family or something, but..." She trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Maybe she just couldn't handle it," I said quietly, but it felt wrong coming out of my mouth. The words sounded hollow, and the doubt in my voice made me uncomfortable. She's been through a lot. Tony shifted uncomfortably beside me. You think she left because of us? I don't know. She was different that night. Like she was scared. She kept looking over her shoulder like she was afraid someone was following her. And she hasn't been picking up my texts, Tony added. There was a long silence. The fire crackled louder in the quiet, but it only seemed to deepen the sense of unease in the air. Do you think she's okay? I asked, breaking the silence. No, Tony muttered, shaking his head. I think she got out before whatever's still in that hospital got to her. But we're not so lucky. I feel it, man. The night stretched on, each of us lost in our thoughts. The fire burned low, casting long shadows, and the wind began to pick up again, sending leaves rustling across the ground. It wasn't until we returned to our rooms after the campfire that everything took a darker turn. Tony was the first to notice the note slipped under our door, sitting there like it had always belonged. The moment I picked it up, I knew it wasn't from Rachel. It couldn't be. The handwriting was too neat, too deliberate, and there was a chilling purpose in the message it carried. You've seen what's in the hospital. She's still here. You haven't seen everything. The real answers lie beneath. Come alone, we'll be waiting. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My chest tightened as I read it again, my fingers trembling slightly. I could feel Tony's presence beside me, silent and stiff. This can't be real, he said, finally breaking the silence. Who would even? This has to be some sick prank. I shook my head, my voice low. What if it's not? The door swung open and Andre, Lex, and Kelsey stepped in, their faces falling instantly at the sight of us. Lex narrowed his eyes at the note in my hand. What's that? Tony answered before I could. Someone's messing with us, he said, his voice hard but edged with fear. Or maybe it's whoever's behind all that crap in the hospital. No, I said firmly, holding up the note. This is more than just a joke. It's from whoever's behind everything, the experiments, the hospital, and Rachel's disappearance. The room fell into heavy silence. Kelsey stepped closer, her face pale, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. But what does it mean? She asked, her voice trembling. What do they want with us? They want us back there, Andre muttered, his jaw tightening as he glanced around the room. It's bigger than we thought. The real answers lie beneath, Lex read aloud, his voice dripping with unease. That's the tunnels. They're talking about the tunnels, aren't they? No one had to answer, we all felt it. The note had left us no choice but to go back. If there was even a chance Rachel was still in there, we couldn't just leave her. And if the note was right, we hadn't seen everything yet. But the last part, come alone, we'll be waiting, hung in the air like a warning, a shadow lingering over every other thought. I'll go alone, I said suddenly, my voice cutting through the tense silence. The words felt foreign, like they weren't my own. But deep down I knew it was the only way. Whoever had left the note wasn't going to give us any answers unless they got what they wanted. Tony grabbed my arm, his face pale. Don't be stupid. You don't know what's down there. It's probably a trap. I know, I replied, my voice soft but resolute. But we need answers. We can't just sit here and act like none of this is happening. Not after what we saw. Maybe I should be the one to go then, Tony said. I'm the one who pushed us to go to the hospital in the first place. It's my fault Rachel was left behind. Andre stepped forward, his expression hard. Neither of you are going alone. If this is real, we stick together. We're not letting anyone take this on by themselves. It's not up for discussion. The note clearly said, I started, but Lex interrupted me before I could finish. Enough, he snapped. We're all going, that's it. He looked at Andre, and Andre nodded. You're not talking your way out of this, man. If there's something down there, we're going to face it together. I glanced at Kelsey, who had been silent, her eyes wide and brimming with fear. She took a deep breath and gave a hesitant nod. I'm in too. We need to know what happened to Rachel. I exhaled slowly, the knot in my chest loosening. All right, I said finally. We do this together, but we have to be careful. We don't know what's waiting for us down there. Andre read the note again, his brow furrowing. The tunnels, he said softly. They're the key to all of this. Whatever's down there, that's where we'll find the truth. No one disagreed. For the first time since all of this began, we felt a grim sense of unity, a shared determination that bound us together. We didn't know what awaited us beneath the hospital, but we knew one thing for sure. We couldn't turn back now. A thick fog enveloped the campus the next morning, blanketing the grounds in a pale gray haze. The usual sounds of laughter and chatter from students were silent, replaced by an eerie quiet that seemed to seep into everything. We gathered in the rec room, Tony, Andre, Lex, Kelsey, and me. We knew we needed to plan this carefully. None of us could ignore the weight of the note or the danger we all knew we were walking into. "We need to pack light," Andre said, breaking the silence as he unfolded a crude map of the hospital grounds we'd snagged from maintenance. His finger traced the faint lines of the tunnel entrance inside the hospital. "If this is where they want us to go, we need to be able to move quickly. I'm guessing there's no easy way out if things go south." Tony leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, his expression grim. "We don't even know what's down there. For all we know, it could be crawling with whatever the hell those things were." He shuddered, his voice trailing off. "They weren't things," I said quietly, my eyes fixed on the map. "They were people, and if there's any chance Rachel's still alive down there..." I didn't finish the thought. Lex, pacing by the window, glanced back at us. "This is suicide, you know. We don't have weapons, and we're walking into a trap because of a damn note." Kelsey shot him a sharp look. "And what's your plan, Lex?" "Just sit here and hope whoever left that note decides to leave us alone. You saw what they're capable of. If we don't go, it's only a matter of time before they come for us. Besides, you and I both know we can't abandon Rachel." Lex didn't respond, his jaw tightening as he turned back to the window. "We don't have to go in blind," Andre said, trying to steady the group. "We know the tunnels connect to the main hospital, and we know the system down there leads all over campus. If we stick together and stay focused, we might stand a chance." Tony rubbed his temples, his voice strained. "We need supplies, flashlights, first aid, anything we can use to defend ourselves. If this is as bad as it feels, we're not walking out of there without a fight." I nodded, finally pulling myself out of my thoughts. "All right, we divide up the list. Kelsey, you and Lex gather food and water from the cafeteria. Andre, find as many flashlights and batteries as you can. Tony and I will hit maintenance again and see if we can scrounge up anything that can be used as a weapon." Lex scoffed. "Weapons? You mean like a wrench or something? Yeah, that'll work against whatever the hell's down there." "Do you have a better idea?" I snapped, my patience wearing thin. He didn't respond, just muttered something under his breath and grabbed his jacket. The group began to disperse, but before anyone could leave, Kelsey stopped us. "Wait," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "We need to be careful tonight. No splitting up once we're inside, and if anything feels wrong, we leave. No heroics. This isn't a cliché horror movie." Everyone nodded, even Lex, though he looked reluctant. As we went our separate ways to gather supplies, the fog outside seemed to grow thicker, swallowing the campus in an unnatural stillness. It felt like the world was shrinking around us, pulling us closer to the hospital, to the tunnels, to whatever lay beneath. In the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The note had said, "Come alone." But there was no way I was facing this without the others. Whoever or whatever was waiting for us beneath the hospital would have to face all of us. Still, as I packed my bag and checked over my flashlight, I couldn't help but feel the gnawing weight of doubt. We were walking into the unknown, and for all our planning, I wasn't sure any of us were ready for what we might find. The hospital loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette barely visible through the dense fog. The air was cold, sharper than it had been earlier in the day, biting against my skin as we approached. No one spoke. Our footsteps were muffled by the wet grass, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of the supplies we carried. We reached the back entrance, the same one we'd escaped from days earlier. The metal door, slightly ajar, creaked as Tony pushed it open. A faint, sterile odor drifted out. Bleach, decay, and something else that made my stomach turn. "Last chance to turn back," Lex muttered, his voice barely audible. "No one's turning back," Andre replied firmly. He flicked on his flashlight. "Let's get this over with." We slipped inside, the door shutting behind us with a soft click that sounded far louder than it should have. The building felt different now. We moved quickly, retracing our steps through the dimly lit hallways. The floor tiles were cracked and stained. The stairs we'd used last time stood ahead, the lower stairway leading into the blackness below. "This is it," I said, my voice hollow. "Of course it's stairs," Tony muttered, "because an elevator would have been too easy." Andre went first, his flashlight gripped tightly in his hand. Wait until I'm down before the next person starts following. One by one, we descended into the unknown, the cold metal railing biting into my palm. The air grew heavier the further we went, carrying a faint metallic tang that made my throat dry. When we finally reached the bottom, the flashlight beams revealed a narrow, concrete tunnel. The walls were lined with rusted pipes, some leaking a slow trickle of water that dripped into shallow puddles on the floor. The sound echoed around us, giving the space a sense of vastness despite its cramped confines. "Which way?" Kelsey asked, her voice trembling. Andre checked the map of the tunnels we'd found in the maintenance room. "Left. The main tunnel should lead us deeper into the complex. If the note was right, the answers are down here somewhere." As we moved, the tension between us grew. Every sound felt amplified, the shuffle of our boots, the distant drip of water, the faint hum of machinery somewhere far off. "Does anyone else feel that?" Tony asked, suddenly stopping in his tracks. "Feel what?" I whispered. "Like we're being watched." No one responded, but I could see it on their faces. They felt it too. The tunnel eventually opened into a larger chamber, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights overhead. Before anyone could say anything else, a sound echoed through the chamber, similar to the one we heard in the hospital days before. A low, rhythmic guttural noise that sent a shiver down my spine. "Did you hear that?" Kelsey whispered, her flashlight shaking slightly in her hand. We froze, the beam of Andre's flashlight swinging wildly as he scanned the room. The noise came again, louder this time. It sounded almost human, but not quite. "It's coming from up ahead," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "No," Lex hissed. "We're not going toward that. Are you insane?" "We don't have a choice," Andre said firmly, his grip tightening around his wrench. "If Rachel's down here, we can't leave her." Reluctantly, we moved forward, the sound growing louder with every step. The tunnel narrowed again, forcing us into single file. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. We ended up in a large room. I covered my nose to mask the burnt scent hitting me. Inside, everything seemed to be covered in a light layer of soot, and on the far side of the room, a rusted furnace. Along the walls were rows of metal gurneys with body bags resting on them. Then we saw it. A figure resting on one of the gurneys, covered by a white sheet just the like ones we saw inside the hospital. Only, this time it was motionless. Kelsey moved towards it first. "Is that—" But her words trailed off as we got closer. She slowly started to lift the sheet off of the humanoid figure. It was James, or what was left of him. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and his body twisted at unnatural angles. A sharp, metallic smell filled the air, and I had to fight the urge to gag. Kelsey screamed. "Holy shit," Tony breathed, his flashlight trembling in his hand. What did they do to him?" Andre knelt beside the body, his expression grim. "He's been dead for a while," he said quietly. "But how did he get down here? He wasn't with us at the hospital." Before anyone could answer, the guttural noise came again, this time from behind us, louder and closer than before. "We need to move," I said, panic rising in my chest. "Now." As we turned to leave, a shadow moved at the edge of the flashlight beams. "Wait, did you see that?" Kelsey whispered, her voice trembling. Another sound echoed through the room, this time a soft, shuffling noise. My stomach dropped as a figure stepped into the light, blocking our exit. It was Rachel, or at least it looked like her. Her eyes were empty, her movements jerky and unnatural. A deep scar ran across her forehead, and the way she stared at us sent chills through my entire body. "Rachel?" I said, my voice barely audible. She let out a low, guttural growl, her head tilting unnaturally to the side. Then she lunged. Time slowed as Rachel lunged, her unnatural movements horrifying and swift. Andre reacted first, shoving Kelsey out of the way and raising his wrench in a futile attempt to protect us. "Rachel, stop!" he shouted, his voice trembling as though some shred of the person we once knew might still be inside. She didn't stop. She didn't even flinch. The impact sent Andre crashing to the floor, his flashlight spinning wildly as it hit the ground. Shadows danced across the walls, making everything feel even more chaotic. Rachel clawed at him, her movements feral, her growls echoing like something out of a nightmare. "Get her off him!" Kelsey screamed. Tony and Lex grabbed her, their hands shaking as they tried to pull her back, but she was stronger than she should have been, inhumanly strong. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest until Kelsey shoved something into my hands. The crowbar. "Do something," she yelled. My mind raced. It wasn't Rachel, it couldn't be. But as I raised the crowbar, I hesitated. What if it was her? What if there was a way to save her? Andre screamed in pain, snapping me out of my thoughts. His arm was bleeding, her nails digging deep into his skin. "I'm sorry," I whispered, swinging the crowbar. The impact sent her sprawling, her body hitting the floor with a sickening thud. She lay still for a moment, and I thought it was over. Then she started to move again. Her head twisted unnaturally, her eyes locking onto me. The guttural growl returned, deeper and more menacing, as she pushed herself up, her limbs bending at impossible angles. "Run," Andre shouted, clutching his arm. We didn't need to be told twice. Grabbing Andre, we bolted down the tunnel, the sound of her growls echoing behind us. My flashlight bobbed wildly. "What the hell was that?" Tony yelled as we ran, his voice breaking. "Not now," Lex snapped, his breathing ragged. The tunnel opened into another chamber, this one larger and filled with machinery. Pipes crisscrossed the ceiling, and the walls were lined with monitors, most of them cracked or flickering with static. In the center of the room stood a large metal door, its surface covered in the same strange symbols we'd seen earlier. Andre stumbled, his face pale. Blood dripped from his arm, leaving a trail behind us. "She's still coming," Kelsey cried, glancing back. "Help me with this," Lex shouted, running to the door. Tony and I joined him, our hands scrambling for a way to open it. The door didn't have a handle, just a keypad with a faintly glowing screen. "Shit, what's the code?" Tony yelled, slamming his fist against the door. "I don't know," Lex shouted back. Behind us, the sound of Rachel, or whatever she had become, grew louder. Her growls were joined by a strange metallic clicking noise that made my skin crawl. "Figure it out fast," Kelsey yelled, pulling a knife from her bag and turning to face the tunnel. Andre, leaning heavily against the wall, pulled the crumpled map of the tunnels from his pocket and shoved it into my hands. "There. Might be something," he said through gritted teeth. I scanned the map, my hands shaking. The symbols on the door matched something in the corner of the map, a sequence of numbers and letters. "Try 7CA43, I shouted. Lex punched it in, and for a terrifying moment nothing happened. Then, with a low hiss, the door slid open, revealing another tunnel bathed in red light. "Go!" Tony yelled, pulling Andre through. Kelsey was the last to follow, her knife clutched tightly as she backed toward the door. Rachel's figure appeared in the distance, her growls growing louder as she moved faster, her body jerking with each step. Kelsey hesitated for a split second, then bolted through the door. Tony slammed his fist against a button on the other side, and the door slid shut just as Rachel reached it. The sound of her growls and the metallic clicking didn't fade. She pounded against the door, the force shaking the ground beneath us, but allowing us a moment to breathe. Kelsey looked towards Andre. "You're hurt?" Pulling out a first aid kit. "Let me help you." "I'm fine," Andre said, gasping for air. "Really?" "Shut up, tough guy." Tony grabbed some gauze from Kelsey and tightly wrapping around his arm. "Like you said, we're in this together." "We can't stay here," Andre said weakly, his face pale. "We won't," I said, glancing down the red-lit tunnel. "But wherever this leads, it might not be any better." The others looked at me, their faces filled with fear and exhaustion. No one said anything. We just kept moving, deeper into the unknown. The red-lit tunnel stretched endlessly before us. The deeper we went, the more the walls changed as cement gave way to metal, the dim emergency lighting casting long shadows over sterile industrial corridors. At the end of the passage was a door. Unlike the others, this one was reinforced steel, a keycard scanner mounted beside it, but someone had left it unlocked. Or maybe they wanted us to find it. I pushed it open. Inside, the office was unsettlingly clean, a large desk, filing cabinets meticulously organized, medical equipment lining the walls. A laptop sat open, casting a dull glow over the papers beside it. The old Department of Labor insignia was stamped across some of them, but most had a different logo. "Life skills? What's that?" I muttered. Andre, clasping his arm in pain. "Life Skills is the company which the Department of Labor contracts with," he explained. "But they're dropping the contract soon." Sitting behind the desk at the back of the room was a man, sitting silently, who we hadn't noticed at first. Tall, late 50s, maybe early 60s, silver hair combed back neatly. His suit was expensive, but he wore a lab coat over it, as if he couldn't decide which role was more important. His posture was composed, his hands folded before him, but his eyes, cold, piercing blue, studied us like specimens in a petri dish. "You've been busy," he said. I could hear Tony's breath hitch behind me. Lex shifted his weight, subtly readying himself for a fight. The man sighed as if this was all a mild inconvenience. "Breaking into restricted areas, trespassing in classified facilities. I expected more from you." He glanced at Kelsey. "Especially you, Miss Brooks." She stiffened. "Who the hell are you?" Lex demanded. The man considered the question before answering. "My name is Dr. Everett Vance," he said finally. "I oversee operations here." Kelsey's hands curled into fists. "Operations? You mean the people you're torturing, the ones you're experimenting on?" Vance didn't flinch. "You use such dramatic language," he said. "Experimentation, torture." "No, Miss Brooks. What we do here is research." A cold weight settled in my gut. "What kind of research requires kidnapping people?" I snapped. Vance tilted his head slightly. "I think you misunderstand the nature of this place." He gestured around the room as if the answer was obvious. "You are all so eager to believe in the illusion. Job Corps, a second chance for the underprivileged, training for the workforce, stability." He smiled. "But what is this program really? Government-funded housing, cheap labor, young people with no connections, no safety net, no one who will ask questions if they were to go missing. We have a system that takes in those with nowhere else to go and repurposes them into something more useful." I clenched my jaw. "You're using the students," Tony murmured, horror creeping into his voice. Vance nodded as if explaining a simple truth. "We all use them. Life skills, the Department of Labor, even the corporations that hire from these programs." His gaze flickered toward the medical equipment. "The difference is my work acknowledges reality. This system is built to produce workers, not people. You are not here to thrive, you are here to be made compliant." Lex's voice was low, dangerous. "Life skills is behind all of this. Why are they dropping their contract with the Department of Labor?" Vance exhaled sharply as if annoyed by the question. "Life skills is a business, Mr. Carter, a business that thrives on perception. Their investors expect results, workforce development, rehabilitation." He waved a hand. "But my research, it does not produce profitable results. Some subjects fail to adapt." He meant die. "Not to worry," Vance sighed. "We will simply pack up and resume our research elsewhere." Tony narrowed his eyes. "Then why do it? If it's not profitable, what's the point?" Vance studied him as if mildly impressed by the question. "The problem with capitalism," he said finally, "is that it still relies on cooperation." He turned his laptop towards us and tapped a key. The screen flickered, showing images of former students, not in their homes, not out in the world, but locked up in holding cells. All of them had a thin scar along their foreheads, resembling the one we saw on Rachel. They looked lifeless, like their souls had been drained. "Despite every economic incentive," he continued, "people resist. They unionize. They strike. They sabotage. They rebel. Even those at the bottom, those with no other options, still find ways to defy the role they've been given." He gestured toward the screen. "My work seeks to remove that defect." A pit formed in my stomach. "You're not just experimenting on them," Kelsey said, her voice almost a whisper. "You're trying to make them obedient." Vance inclined his head. "Compliance is efficiency, Ms. Brooks. Imagine a workforce that never questioned its conditions, that never demanded higher wages, that never dreamed of resistance." He exhaled almost wistfully. "You cannot beat disobedience out of people. You cannot threaten them into submission forever. But you can rewire the process before it begins." He gestured toward the medical equipment. "We are refining techniques that will, in time, make disciplinary measures obsolete. A worker who cannot conceive of rebellion will never need to be subdued. A workforce engineered for efficiency will never demand rest. If perfected, this process could eliminate conflict entirely." I felt sick. "You're not making workers," Lex said, voice low and furious. "You're making slaves." Vance sighed. "How very dramatic." Kelsey stepped in. Does the Department of Labor know about your research? There's no way they let you get away with this." Vance chuckled. "The DOL is one of our biggest contributors." "What? You actually thought they cared about the conditions of the workforce?" "They'll throw a bone every now and then. Just enough to prevent people from realizing the truth, Vance continued. But at the end of the day, they are interested in the same thing we are, a profitable workforce. Tony stepped forward. What did you do to Rachel? Vance raised an eyebrow. The girl outside, Tony pressed. What did you do to her? For the first time, Vance's expression changed. A flicker of something, curiosity, maybe even mild amusement. Ah, Rachel. He leaned against the desk, steepling his fingers. I suppose you could say she was one of my more successful subjects. Kelsey's breath caught. What the hell does that mean? Vance glanced at one of the monitors. The screen flickered, cycling through security feeds throughout the campus. Her body rejected the treatment, he said simply. She lasted longer than most, but ultimately, she was not viable. I swallowed hard. Is she going to survive? Vance tilted his head slightly, as if deciding whether the question even mattered. Not for much longer. Tony's jaw clenched. We can still save her, Kelsey said quickly. We can get her out. No, Vance interrupted, his voice sharp. Even if she were stable enough to move, even if she somehow survived the next 24 hours, where would you take her? A hospital? He chuckled, shaking his head. You think I operate alone? That this facility is the only one of its kind? That there aren't people in high places ensuring this research continues? A buzzing sound filled the room. I turned just in time to see the laptop screen flicker. Then the security feeds changed. Students walking the halls, going about their day. Then the image changed. A different hallway, the exit, security officers, dozens of them. Vance had already called them. We're taking Rachel, Kelsey spat at Vance, and we're getting the hell out of here. You think you're leaving? Vance asked in a curious tone. And do you really think she can be saved? Vance turned towards me, grinning. My stomach dropped, a knock at the door, then another, and then the handle started to turn. I don't know why I'm relating this, but I need to get it out. I haven't slept properly in months. Even though we moved, I still wake up at night, expecting to hear him. It started when my roommate Kyle and I moved into a cheap rental house last fall. We were college students desperate for an affordable place, so when we found a 2-bedroom way below market rent, we didn't ask questions. The landlord was a strange old guy, eager to sign the lease. No walkthrough, no paperwork delays. Just handed us the keys and said, "Make yourselves at home." At the time, we thought we had lucked out. For a while, things were normal. The house was a little rundown, creaky floors, bad insulation, but nothing alarming. Then small things started happening. Cabinets left slightly open when I knew I had closed them. Food missing, not full meals, just little things. A slice of bread, a few crackers, a cup of juice gone. At first I thought Kyle was taking my stuff, but he swore he wasn't. Then he started noticing it too. Leftovers moved. Lights on that he was sure he had turned off. We laughed it off. House is haunted, Kyle joked. But we both started feeling uneasy. Then one night I woke up at 3 a.m. to a sound that made my stomach drop. Breathing. Not from Kyle's room. Inside the walls. I held my breath, listening. It was slow, shallow, rhythmic. Then a faint shuffling sound like someone shifting their weight. I told myself it was nothing. Pipes. The wind. But it kept happening. Night after night. Always around the same time. Then came the night I knew we weren't alone. Kyle was out late. I was home alone, working on an assignment when I heard it. The fridge door opening. I froze. I was the only one there. My heart pounded as I grabbed a knife from the kitchen. The house was silent now, but I could feel something was wrong. Stepping into the hallway, I saw it. The fridge door was swinging shut. I searched every room, every closet, even under the beds. Nothing. The doors were locked. The windows secured. It made no sense. Kyle rushed home when I called him, and we decided to check the house from top to bottom. That's when we found it. The hallway closet had a loose air vent near the floor. It looked wrong, out of place. Kyle pulled it off. Behind it, there was a hole, a dark, narrow crawl space between the walls, big enough for someone to fit inside. We shined a flashlight into the hole, and my stomach turned. A dirty blanket, an empty water bottle, a crumpled granola bar wrapper. Someone had been living there. We didn't sleep that night. First thing in the morning, we called the landlord. He barely reacted. Just sighed. Thought I patched that up last time. Last time? That's when we learned the truth. The house had been rented to multiple tenants before us. None of them stayed longer than a year. The landlord refused to say why. We got the cops involved, but by then, the space was empty. Whoever had been there was gone. The worst part? The officer who checked the place told us something that still makes my skin crawl. The dust around the hole had been recently disturbed. Whoever was there had been watching us, moving in and out while we slept. We broke the lease a month later, lost our deposit, slept on friends' couches until we found a new place. I don't care. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up feeling like I'm being watched, and I wonder, did we leave him behind? Or did he follow us? Recently, my friends and I have become obsessed with online gaming. Being in college and often seen as social pariahs, my only friends, Trey and Zoe, found gaming to be an escape from the monotony of young adult life. We met through school, and the game became our weekly Tuesday ritual. I don't want to name names for copyright reasons, but it's a wildly popular free-to-play online battle royale game. The fast-paced gameplay and unique mechanics made it easy to lose ourselves for hours every week. At first, we tried creating open lobbies to team up with other players, but we quickly realized we preferred to only play with each other. So, to avoid unwanted party members, we decided to start using randomly generated join codes to ensure it was only the three of us on a team. No exceptions. We also created a private Discord server for just the three of us. It was where we shared the randomly generated join codes and hopped into a private voice chat each week. Over time, it became more than that, though. It was a place to share funny memes, dumb videos, and strategize about the game. Even so, it served one main purpose: our sacred Tuesday night ritual. Every week at 7 p.m., we'd send the join code, hop into our matches, and lose ourselves in the game for hours that seemed to pass like mere minutes. On this particular evening, it was my turn to host, and I started up the game like any other Tuesday. I was excited to finally play the new map that had just released over the weekend. As I loaded in, something about the game seemed a little off, but I didn't think much of it. I jumped into voice chat, sent the room code, and waited for Trey and Zoe to join. The lobby looked strange. The screen was completely black. I couldn't see the characters at all, but the text fields were still visible. I wondered if it could have been some sort of botched update. I noticed Zoe's gamer tag appear. She had joined the game, but I still couldn't see anything else. Then an unfamiliar name appeared on the screen: Cabman. I stared at it for a few seconds, puzzled, but assumed Trey had just changed his gamer tag for some reason. After all, we were the only three people who had access to this lobby. I started the match, thankful that the loading screen appeared normal. Whatever glitch had happened earlier seemed to have resolved itself for now. Our characters began the level, and everything seemed normal at first. However, I didn't recognize the cabman's skin, and something about it felt unnerving. He was tall, draped in a long black peacoat, and wore a pitch-black flat cap that cast an ominous shadow over his face. Underneath the brim, his only visible features were two glowing eyes that pierced through the darkness. "Who's Cabman?" Zoe asked through voice chat, her tone confused and trailing off. "I thought it was Trey," I replied, equally perplexed. "I'm not in yet," Trey responded. "I was waiting for the screen to load, but it never let me in." "Are you guys already in a match?" The three of us paused. "Then who is Cabman?" I asked, feeling my stomach drop. "I didn't invite anyone else, did you?" There was no way anyone could have joined our server without the randomly generated code. The odds of someone accidentally entering our code exactly right were something like 1 in 2 billion. "I didn't invite anyone," Zoe said with an uneasy laugh. "Do you think it's some kind of glitch or something?" "Wait, so someone else joined? Can we just boot them?" Trey suggested, clearly feeling out of the loop. "No big deal, right?" Trey's idea made sense, but I couldn't shake the creeping feeling I had about this strange player joining our private server. If I could just kick them and start a new lobby, everything should go back to normal, right? I pulled up the menu and tried clicking the kick option beside the mystery player's name. The moment I pressed the button, the game froze. My screen flickered to black, and I could hear my monitor crackling like old TV static. The monitor remained dark for a few seconds, until an unexpected pop-up window appeared. It was an ad for a taxi service with a pixelated photo of an outdated Crown Victoria taxi and bold, bright yellow text that read, "Best service, pick up and drop off, available 24/7. The timing felt eerily strange and completely out of place. I hesitated, staring at the ad for a moment, before hovering my mouse over the X to close the window. It seemed too coincidental to ignore. As soon as I closed the window, the game's loading screen appeared, and I waited for the spinning icon to vanish. When the game finally reloaded, Cabman was still there, standing in the same spot as if he were waiting for us. This wasn't normal, but I didn't know what to do. "No good," I told the others. "Cabman is still in the game. I can't kick him for some reason." Zoe tried to maintain her composure. "Maybe we have to finish the match. Let's just play and see if it will take us back to the lobby after." Trey seemed annoyed, but none of us knew what else to do. So Zoe and I started our run with Cabman. It became obvious that he wasn't just any player. As the match continued, strange things began happening. The character acted oddly. He wouldn't pick up weapons, build, or attack. Instead, he followed us everywhere, always staying just out of frame, as if he didn't want to be fully seen. If we ran ahead, he would stay behind, but the moment you'd pan over to look for him, he was suddenly only a few feet away, watching silently. We tried to interact with him, but his actions felt disorganized, like they were out of sync with normal player controls. His movements were jerky and delayed, like a broken NPC in a poorly made mod. Yet, the weirdest part was his in-game microphone appeared to always be active, like he was speaking but no sound came through. I tried adjusting my headset and turning up the volume, hoping to hear something, but all I could hear was a very faint static sound. The closer I listened, I thought I could make out muffled voices, whispering unintelligibly. Before long, Cabman stopped following us altogether. It was like he was trying to lead us instead. Whenever we hid or tried to loot, he would continue ahead, stopping at seemingly random points on the map, just waiting. At first, I thought he might be scouting ahead, but something about his behavior seemed off. I noticed that wherever Cabman stood, the map began to change. Trees near him shed their leaves, becoming bare and lifeless. Grassy fields withered and dried up as if drained of life. The sky above him became dark and menacing, but only small sections would experience these unnatural atmospheric changes. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of the clouds flickering and glitching behind him, revealing what looked like raw, unedited code. It was almost like Cabman's very existence was corrupting the world around him. "Are you seeing this?" Zoe said, her voice shaking. "Seeing what?" Trey asked, still stuck at the frozen loading screen. "The map. It's like glitching or something," I replied, my voice trembling through the headset. "Glitching how?" Trey shouted back, frustrated yet intrigued. A house we were looting began to crumble into ash just as Cabman stepped inside, leaving nothing but an empty black void where the house once stood. "It's like he's manipulating the game itself," I stammered, feeling the paranoia growing inside me. It felt as if Cabman could somehow hear my words and would use them against me if I wasn't careful. In the blink of an eye, another team darted over the hill, guns blazing as they charged toward us. "Zoe, this team is going to end us. I was so distracted by this weird Cabman stuff, I forgot we were actually playing against other players," I shouted into my mic, panicking. "Start running toward the convergence circle. If we can make it there, we'll be in the end game, and they'll have to follow us into the chaos of the final remaining teams," Zoe shouted back, her voice tense. "I don't know if we'll make it that far," I yelled with anxiety in my tone. "My health is draining fast, and I don't think I have enough stamina to outrun them." Just as the words left my mouth, a weird-looking, old, beat-up Crown Victoria taxicab pulled up next to the battle zone. Cars were a common part of the game, and players often used them to cover large areas, but I'd never seen a taxicab before. It seemed completely out of place. Then again, everything I'd seen since Cabman joined had felt out of place. "What the heck is this thing?" I asked in disbelief. "It looks like a taxicab, and—" "You see who's driving, don't you?" Zoe retorted, her tone becoming more animated. "A taxicab," Trey shouted. "There are not taxicabs in this game." Behind the wheel sat the ghostly figure of Cabman, with his glowing eyes piercing through the windshield like two headlights shining from the driver's seat. "I don't think we have much of a choice, Zoe. If we don't get in the car, we're dead," I exclaimed, my voice trembling with dread. "I hate that you're right," Zoe replied reluctantly, her hesitation evident. "Let's just hope he's actually going to help us." Cabman's taxi was parked just a few feet away from me, but Zoe still had some ground to cover. She was crossing a hill, firing rounds from her tactical shotgun at the enemy team as she ran along the edge of a cliff. I tried my best to dodge attacks, but my vitality was fading quickly. Forcing my character to roll to the right side of the taxi, I jumped into the passenger seat. I watched intently as the mob of players chasing me closed in on the vehicle. To my surprise, the moment they touched the taxi, their characters began to disintegrate. It was as if they were being torn apart pixel by pixel, each step closer causing them to dematerialize more until nothing remained of their former selves. Zoe was almost out of ammo, but she forced her character into a ground slide to quickly make it down the hill. Cabman remained completely motionless, seemingly unfazed by the chaos unfolding around us. Zoe barreled toward the vehicle with one last opponent hot on her heels. "Zoe, there's still one guy on your back. Be careful," I shouted into my headset. "Yeah, you guys aren't exactly helping either," she shot back. "I don't really know what's going on, but I don't have enough health left to help anyway," I admitted shamefully. "I know. I kinda suck tonight." Just then, Cabman appeared directly behind Zoe, standing strangely still in the middle of the battlefield, as if he had just teleported there without making a sound. I never saw him step out of the car, yet somehow, he was now positioned between Zoe and the rival player. For a moment it felt like time stood still. We anxiously watched as the player careened headlong toward Cabman. Just as the player came within a foot of him, Cabman's body suddenly levitated a few inches off the ground, and a strange shockwave emitted from him. The wave cut through the air with an unearthly droning sound, slicing straight through the player. Within seconds, the character's body began to evaporate into thin air, as if being erased from existence. Now that the opposing team was no longer a threat and we had made it to the cab, I was finally able to collect my thoughts. The game seemed eerily quiet. No in-game music, no sound effects. But I could hear the sound of the whispering from before, now louder and more distinct. It was definitely coming from Cabman's mic. A shrill, austere muttering that sounded like hundreds of voices chastising me. "That was pretty wild," Zoe said. "I thought for sure that was going to be game over, but that Cabman guy, he's some kind of something." "What do you mean?" Trey chimed in, frustration evident in his voice. "What am I missing? This sucks that I can't see anything." "It's honestly kind of creepy," I answered, my voice low and apprehensive. "He doesn't seem like a real character in the game. I mean, I've never seen anything like that before. It's like he's just erasing players from the game. It's freaking me out. Guys, I'm missing all the weird stuff, so I'm gonna reboot my computer and see if that fixes my issue," Trey groaned. "Hopefully by the time I'm back online, your match will be over. You better come back quick," I shot back. "I'm gonna try to talk to this cabman dude." "Wait, for real?" Trey exclaimed. "All right, keep me posted. I'll hurry. Honestly, it's probably just some 10-year-old rich kid with an expensive skin." "How are you going to talk to him?" Zoe asked. You could hear the surprise in her voice. "I'm not sure that's a good idea with how strange this whole thing has been." "I get that, but he did help us out of a pinch back there, and we'll probably win this match because of him," I responded, trying to sound apathetic. "He clearly has a microphone. It's been active this whole time." "Yeah, but have you heard the weird crap coming out of that mic?" Zoe retorted, her tone sharpening. "It doesn't sound like background noise. It's like a woman screaming in the distance, but it's faint, like she's far away. It's distorted too, almost like it's staticky. It's been giving me the creeps this whole time." Her words hung in the air for a moment, sending a chill down my spine. I tried to wrap my head around what she had just said. "What? Why are you just now bringing this up?" I cried, my voice intensifying with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Why didn't you bring it up?" Zoe shot back, clearly irritated. "I was surprised you didn't say something about it sooner." "I haven't heard any women screaming," I stuttered, my voice faltering, hesitating as I tried to get my sentence out. "It just sounds like..." "Sounds like what?" Zoe pressed, her tone stirring with curiosity. "What did you hear?" "It sounds like... people," I said slowly, not wanting to say more but knowing Zoe would press me further. "Like lots of people whispering angrily. They're distant, but it's awful. Their voices are cruel, like they're scolding someone. Or maybe me. I don't know." Zoe was silent. I could tell she wasn't sure what to say. "That's not what I heard at all," she said faintly. "But now it feels even creepier." We sat in silence for a few moments, trying to process everything we had discussed. I hung my head, with my eyes fixed on the worn-out carpet underneath me. The faded colors and frayed edges couldn't distract me from the chaos inhabiting my mind. Nothing that was happening made sense. None of it. The silence was broken by the hateful whispers bleeding through Cabman's mic. The longer I sat there, the louder they became, making it hard to think clearly. I took a deep breath and lifted my head to check my computer screen. I was surprised to see it flickering erratically again. The taxi had also started moving across the map. Not driving, though, sort of phasing between different locations in a matter of seconds. With each flicker of the screen, its headlights would cast long, cascading shadows across the battlefield. Not to change the subject, I said, trying to steady my voice, but something weird is happening in the game right now. What do you mean? Zoe asked, concerned. The taxi, I said, watching the screen in utter confusion. I mean, we're moving, but not normally. The screen keeps flickering, and we're kind of just teleporting to random locations on the map, like we're glitching or something. Zoe stayed silent, and I could hear her control stick turning slightly as if she were adjusting her view. Yeah, I see it now too, she said quietly. It's like the whole game is breaking down. The flickering became more extreme as the taxi continued its course, all at once coming to a halt in the middle of the convergence circle. We had made it to the final destination, but I'd never seen it look like this before. The circle wasn't filled with other players. In fact, it was nothing like I was used to. The ground was littered with what looked like decaying bodies, their character models grotesquely melted and glitched. They flickered, fading in and out, as the rest of the world seemed to deteriorate and grow darker. The sound of wailing and screams could be heard growing louder as the cab came to a halt squarely in the middle of it all. The disfigured bodies clawed and scratched at the sides of Cabman's taxi, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if they were trying to break inside. "Do you see this?" I yelled, the words hanging on my lips. "See it?" Zoe shot back, her voice trembling. "I can't even describe it. What the heck is this? Something is seriously wrong with this game." Zoe tried to exit the taxi, but her character wouldn't move. I tried to do the same, but no matter how many times I pressed the button, my character wouldn't leave the taxi. "So, I'm stuck," I said with apprehension in my tone. "I can't get out of the car." "Same," Zoe replied. Her voice was confused and agitated. "What is this? Are we glitched?" Suddenly, Trey's voice cut through the chaos. "Guys, I don't want to downplay this moment you're having, but something's happening on my end," he said. His voice sounded concerned. When I rebooted my computer and logged back into Discord, I noticed I had a new friend request. "What?" "I mean, I guess it's strange that anyone besides us would want to be friends with you, but that's not nearly the weirdest thing that's happened today," I quipped, staring nervously at the flickering screen. The whispers around Cabman's taxi grew louder, almost drowning Trey out. "Ignore the unwarranted sarcasm, Trey. Who's it from?" Zoe said, half laughing, but also interested in what had Trey worked up. "I don't know," Trey replied, his voice shaking slightly. "There was no name, it's just blank. But their avatar is a picture of a taxicab. But that's not even the creepy part. They sent me a private message too, and when I tried to open it, this pop-up window came up. It said, 'Cabman's taxi service, the ride that takes you where you need to go.'" Zoe let out a nervous laugh. "You're joking, right? This sounds too ridiculous to be real. Please tell me you're kidding." "I wish I was," Trey shot back. The pop-up wouldn't go away at first. I had to click it 3 or 4 times, and the window kept acting glitchy, randomly displaying lines of code. When I finally got it closed, I could see the message from the unknown person. "What did it say?" I asked, though I didn't know if I wanted the answer. Trey paused, then said, "Your driver is here." We all fell silent. The only sound that could be heard was the static and muffled cries in our headsets. My heart sank as I began to wonder if this was more than just a glitch in our game. "You guys still there?" Trey continued, his voice straining. "I haven't even gotten to the worst part yet." "Yeah, I'm here. I'm just trying to make sense of what you're saying," I responded reluctantly. "He's right. This all sounds crazy. We were just playing a game. What's the worst part?" Zoe asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. "Well, right after I read that message, I heard a knock at my door," Trey said apprehensively. I shivered unexpectedly. This felt more like a nightmare than reality. "At your real door, like the door of your actual house?" I asked, my voice shaky with disbelief. "Yeah," Trey said, his voice cracked. "Guys, what do I do? Should I answer it?" "No, don't you dare open that door," Zoe shouted. Just stay on the call, I added quickly, my heart pounding faster. It could be a coincidence, right? People knock on doors all the time. It doesn't have to be cabmen. I mean, it could be the Girl Scouts. Trey didn't reply immediately, but when he spoke, his voice was a whisper. I think I can hear someone trying to open the door. The game flickered again, and Cabman's glowing eyes turned to face us. The screen shifted to display a disturbing close-up of his ghostly, cadaverous face. His unnaturally large, gleaming eyes seemed to peer straight into my very soul. They were stripped of all humanity, cold and sunken, as if staring into an endless void. Guys, the pounding is getting louder, and I'm starting to freak out. Trey's voice cut out unexpectedly. Trey? Zoe asked cautiously. Trey, are you still in chat? Zoe, we have our own cabman problems, I interjected, my voice thick with urgency. I can't move my mouse, and his freaky face is filling up my entire screen. Forget about the stupid game, Zoe shouted. I don't even care about it anymore. I think Trey is actually in danger. I couldn't take much more. Zoe's frustration was grating on my already waning sanity, and the ever-changing horrors unfolding in the game left me reeling. This game was once my sanctuary from the otherwise crippling monotony of life, but now there was no solace. No comfort, only chaos as I stared into the screen, greeted with only a frenzy of flickering monitors and those terrible whispers. Don't get me wrong, I was worried about Trey, but I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that his situation and what was happening in-game weren't separate events. They felt linked, like the game and the real world were bleeding into each other, causing all of our fates to be strangely bound together. This can't be happening, I murmured under my breath. It can't be real. This is just a stupid game. It can't really affect the real world, right? My hand sat trembling on my mouse. I had to do something. Anything that could make this all stop. My gaze never shifted from those unblinking, unyielding, glowing eyes, as if being slowly pulled deeper into madness. Cabman! I shouted, my voice shaking. Stop this! Do you hear me? Just stop it! All of this has to stop! My words reverberated through our headsets like a desperate plea cast into the void. For a moment I stared at the screen, watching those haunting eyes, like two burning candles flickering in the darkness. It felt as if they were reaching through the screen, trying to drag me from this world into their suffocating, malevolent grasp. I waited, breathless, for something, anything to change. You know he can't hear you. Your in-game microphone isn't on, Zoe said, her voice teeming with anxiety. No, he has to hear me, I screamed, anger burning in my throat. This has to end, Zoe. Calm down, it's going to be okay, Zoe answered, her tone softening, trying to calm me. It's just a game. It's not a game anymore, can't you see that? I shouted, my voice cracking with hysteria. It started as just a game, sure, but don't pretend you haven't noticed the shift. Don't act like this isn't all connected. The flickering of the screen intensified, as the image began eerily zooming in on Cabman's disquieting, deadpan face. The lights in my room started to dim, casting unnatural, shadowy silhouettes along the walls that looked like shrieking faces, amplifying the palpable sense of dread in the air. Suddenly, the computer screen turned black, my mouse stopping mid-blink before disappearing into the dense, cold darkness. A faint, otherworldly light faded from around the edges of the monitor, and for a fleeting second, I could have sworn I saw a distorted reflection of my own face staring back at me, looking as though I had Cabman's glowing eyes. With the last glimmer of light gone, the room felt unnervingly silent. Zoe? I called out in distress. Trey? Are you there? There was no response, just the oppressive silence in the inescapable darkness of my empty room. I sat there motionless as my eyes adjusted to my surroundings again. I started to make out the blackened screen of my monitor. It began to crackle with a faint electrical noise. Then a shape started to pull itself out of the screen. At first it was vague, just an indistinct outline, but as it took form, dread washed over me. I could feel my breathing increase as I realized, with mounting horror, that it was Cabman. There was no mistaking those glowing eyes as he pushed through the screen. The monitor had become like a window, its surface parting like mere curtains he lightly brushed aside to make his entrance. His grin stretched unnaturally wide, those sunken eyes piercing through me, as if staring into my very soul. No, I stuttered, scrambling backward as my chair tipped onto two legs after getting snagged on the worn-out carpet under me. It was useless, I couldn't escape. His elongated arm stretched out from the screen, and I could see his calloused, bony fingers emerging from the sleeve of his tattered peacoat. His skin was dry with cracked ridges that scraped against my face as his hand latched onto the side of my head, trapping me in his grasp. I tried to scream, but the sound was little more than a hoarse whisper, so quiet it faded the moment it left my lips. His fingers pressed against my temples, curling like the tendrils of a spider before sliding down to my eyes. "Look," he commanded. His voice was gruff and thick with malice. All I needed was an opening, a moment of weakness, the faint crack so tiny you didn't even notice. "Now see with my eyes. Witness what I am." Pain shot through my skull as his fingers plunged deep into my eyes. It was like he passed through my eyes and reached deep into my subconscious, tearing through my mind like paper. My sense of self was gone, dissolving into something or someone else. I began to hear his thoughts as if they were my own. Then, images flooded my mind. I couldn't feel myself anymore. It was like I had stepped into Cabman, or maybe he had forced me to become him. As if stepping into a vision, my eyes opened, and I found my hands gripping the wheel of a filthy cab. The cracked leather seats were worn and stained, seemingly from years of neglect. The car reeked of stale coffee and some sort of strong chemical stench that burned my nostrils. The headlights pierced the darkness as I pulled up to an apartment stoop at a dimly lit street corner. Panic gripped me as I realized I was driving, but the horrifying truth became clear. I wasn't in control. My hands moved on their own, like I was trapped in a cutscene from a first-person video game, helpless to do anything but watch as the scene played out. I turned to my reflection in the rearview mirror. The face staring back at me wasn't mine at all. It was grotesque and unkempt, with sunken eyes, a scruffy beard, and a foul grin. He wore a jet-black flat cap and a tattered peacoat, his expression cold and calculating. Looking into those horrible eyes, I realized this was no ordinary cab driver. He was a monster, prowling the shadowy streets, waiting for his next helpless victim. I stepped out of the car, the air heavy and damp, as if an impending storm were brewing nearby. I slowly circled the rusty, beat-up 1989 Ford Crown Victoria, its paint peeling like flakes of dried skin. The smell of cheap gasoline mingled with the humid night air. As I rounded the back, I stopped dead in my tracks at the sight of the vanity license plate, CABMAN. My heart sank into my stomach. But before I could fully grasp what I was seeing, I found myself walking up the steps of the darkened stoop and knocking on the door. I knocked again, searching my surroundings for any signs of life. There was no answer, just the sound of leaves rustling as the wind picked up. Reaching for the handle, I found the door was locked. After looking around once more, I began fidgeting with the lock. I'd never tried to break into a house before, but I could tell in my current state that I had done this before. Even so, my attempts were futile. I returned to the car. Every step I took was not my own. My mind pleaded for control as I opened the trunk, my eyes once again drawn to the haunting license plate. Inside, the trunk was lined with old newspapers dated September 14th, 1999. On top of the faded pages were a few feet of rope, a crowbar, and a plastic bag containing what looked like duct tape and pruning shears. My hand lingered over the bag for a moment, but I grabbed the crowbar instead and headed back to the door. This time, I wedged the flat end of the crowbar between the door frame and the door, prying it open to create a gap. Rocking the crowbar back and forth, I was able to widen the opening. Without hesitation, my body slammed into the door, lurching back as the force hurled splintered pieces of wood and caused the latch or bolt mechanism to break. The hinges creaked as the door swung open, revealing nothing but blackness. I peered inside, nervously awaiting what might lie ahead, the crowbar heavy in my hand. A small bit of light crept in from outside as I stepped through the door into a hallway next to some stairs. My mind continued to fight against the involuntary movements I made, trying to comprehend the horrific details of what led me here. Unsure about the house, but this body moved with eerie familiarity. In the silence, I heard the faint creaking of footsteps on old floorboards coming from somewhere upstairs. Flashes of memories began to flood my mind. A young girl's terrified face, her desperate pleas for mercy, and the tension-fueled resolve that had driven me to this very house. I could feel the sinister intentions that Cabman had in mind, leaving me both disgusted and entranced. The memories became clearer, solidifying in my mind with vivid detail. I saw myself driving that filthy cab late at night. The dense fog made it hard to see anything beyond the headlights. A dilapidated signpost appeared through the haze. The faded lettering spelled out Service Road. Instinctively, I pulled onto the broken pavement, the tires crunching against loose gravel. A woman's voice broke the silence from the back seat, her tone filled with agitation. "This isn't the right way. I said Hamilton Avenue," she protested. "This way is quicker," I slurred, my tone flat, devoid of any real emotion. There was an accident up the road when I dropped someone off earlier. It felt strange as the words escaped my lips, my mouth moved, but I wasn't in control of what was said. The voice didn't belong to me, yet it came from my mouth. I was still trapped, watching through Cadman's eyes. The car continued down the desolate road, the woman's protest growing more forceful. My body remained rigid, moving robotically as I blindly followed the twisting path. We rounded a sharp curve and neared the edge of a massive ravine, where only a rickety old guardrail stood between us and the jagged rocks below. The car slowed to a halt at the cliff's edge. The idling engine and the distant chirp of crickets were the only sounds breaking through the silence. A wave of fear washed over me as I felt the evil intentions of Cadman's heart rising within me. The woman's voice trembled as she asked, "Why are we stopping here?" I remained silent, ignoring her question as my hand moved to the door handle. I stepped out of the cab, moving with a purpose that wasn't my own. I knew exactly where I was headed, feeling myself being pulled to the trunk. My thoughts flashed to the pruning shears I'd seen earlier, and everything was starting to make sense. The trunk lid opened, revealing the rope and the plastic bag with the duct tape and pruning shears. There was no sign of the crowbar, but the scene was eerily familiar. I grabbed the rope and pruning shears, then walked back to the rear car door. As I approached, the woman shoved the door open, slamming it into me as she scrambled out of the car. "What is going on?" she screamed hysterically. "What are you doing back here?" I remained silent, my body moving towards her with a relentless determination. She backed away, her chest heaving with each panicked breath. Wrapping the rope around my left arm, I picked up my pace, narrowing the distance between us. I pulled the pruning shears from the bag, gripping them tightly in my right hand. She turned to run, her panicked breaths turning into shallow gasps. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice trembling with fear. My body didn't stop. Words that weren't mine spilled from my mouth. "Give me your money and anything valuable, and I won't have to hurt you." She clutched her bag tighter, shaking her head. "Stay away from me, please, just let me go." I lunged forward, feeling Cadman's excitement at the chance to fight. I grabbed at her arm, swinging the shears violently. She screamed, twisting to break free from my grasp. But in the struggle, the shears plunged into her forearm, leaving a shallow cut but nothing that would be fatal. She shrieked in pain, clutching the wound as tears streamed down her face. "Give me the bag," I barked, holding the shears up. The words felt foreign, as though Cadman's will was speaking through me. She shuddered, reaching for the wound to stop the bleeding. While she was preoccupied, I reached for her purse again, but she twisted to avoid my advances. Still gripping her arm, I forced her to the ground. She cried out, struggling against me. My hand, moving on its own, grabbed her left hand and lifted the shears. A large, luminous engagement ring adorned her finger, the expensive diamond gemstone glittering even in the low light with each desperate move of her hand. "I'll happily take this ring instead," I hissed. Her sobbing grew louder as she writhed beneath me. "Do you want to lose a finger?" "Please stop, please," she begged, her voice cracking. I could feel her squirming and twisting beneath me, kicking her feet violently in an attempt to break free. As she bucked, one of her legs slipped free. She pulled it into her chest and kicked with all her remaining strength, hitting me hard in the chest. I felt the breath leave my lungs as I fell back, the shears slipping from my grasp. She scrambled to her feet, holding her bleeding arm, and fleeing toward the tree line. Seemingly unfazed, I stumbled after her, the rope still in my grip. The fog was thick, but I could hear her desperate sobs and the pounding of her footsteps. She ran, trembling, into the woods near the guardrail, disappearing into the darkness. I pursued her relentlessly, adrenaline fueling my every step as I struggled to regain my breath. The woods were completely shrouded in darkness from the thick fog. I turned and caught a faint glimpse of the cab's headlights, barely cutting through the dense haze several yards away. The rustling of leaves and the crunch of the woman's frantic footsteps echoed through the trees, disorienting me. I tripped on a fallen tree branch and tumbled down the hill. As I struggled to my feet, my pulse pounding in my ears, I spotted the forest's edge and a clearing leading to the main road. Suddenly, she burst out from behind a tree, hurling herself off the embankment toward the road below. I stumbled after her, Cadman's rage fueling every step. In the distance, I heard a car engine approaching. I knew I only had seconds to act, and I could feel the dreadful panic that consumed cabman as if it were my own. Instinctively, I pulled the rope from around my arm and hurled it toward the fleeing woman. It struck her, wrapping around her shoulder and causing her to waver, yet she managed to stay upright. I yanked hard, trying to drag her down, reeling in the rope and tightening it toward her throat. She pushed back against it in a desperate attempt to free herself, but I closed the distance, wrapping my arms around her waist as she struggled. Headlights sliced through the fog, burning into my eye sockets like two stars exploding in the night sky. Blinded and disoriented, I froze for a moment in the beam's reflection. She wasted no time, lunging back against me, forcing me to release my grip and propelling herself out of the car's path. The car drew closer and the headlights grew brighter, searing into my vision. I didn't have the time or perception to brace for the impact. The car hit me with such intense force that it sent me flying. I landed hard on the cold pavement, my eyes shutting as the world around me dissolved. When I opened them, I was back in the house I'd been breaking into, still trapped in Cabman's body. Everything was blurring together as I awoke in the darkness of that house, and I could feel something shifting. The realization that Cabman wasn't just dragging me through these horrifying events of his past for his own amusement. He wanted me to see, to feel, to understand. Each memory, every visceral moment was a piece of a larger puzzle, designed to prepare me for this specific memory. The suffocating weight of his will pressed down harder than it had before. This wasn't random. The memories, the pain, they were a message, a twisted foreshadowing of something far worse. I could hear the faint sound of creaking floorboards upstairs again, bringing me back to the grim reality of my situation. For a moment, it felt like I was in control of my actions as I ascended the staircase. It was almost as if my mind was separating itself from Cabman's influence. I knew he was puppeteering me, but I could feel a sense of my autonomy returning. Each step felt heavier, my breath shallow as I neared the second floor. From the hallway, I could hear a voice and see flickering lights coming from one of the rooms. It was a man's voice, clear, authoritative, and delivered with a deliberate cadence. I approached the partially open doorway, peering inside. The flickering lights came from a TV, casting a soft glow that illuminated the otherwise dark room. A close-up of a news reporter's somber face filled the screen. A police report was filed against a local cab driver by a woman claiming she escaped a violent assault, the reporter asserted, his voice steady, avoiding dramatic fluctuations. The victim, bloodied and bruised, alleged the cab driver attempted to kill her. A grainy photo of a man wearing a dirty flat cap and a tattered pea coat, the same clothes I had grown so accustomed to seeing on cabmen, appeared on the screen. My chest tightened as the name appeared beneath the image, Walter Culver. The reporter continued, in a statement, Walter has denied all allegations, claiming the accusations were fueled by the town's bias against him. The creaking of floorboards returned, drawing my attention away from the TV. This time, I could make out the distinct sound of footsteps producing the noise. Each step quietly echoed from down the hallway. I could feel Cabman urging me to follow the sound. I felt as though we had become symbiotically connected. While it seemed I could now make some decisions for myself, Cabman still had the final say over my actions. Stepping out of the TV room, the hallway seemed so dark that my eyes struggled to adjust. I pressed my hand against the wall to ensure I could find my way, realizing I was still carrying the crowbar in my other hand. The creaking had stopped, but I knew I was close to where it had been coming from. I found the edge of a doorway to my right, and I cautiously felt my way inside. I could hear the sound of labored breathing beneath me, heavy and distressed. My pulse quickened as my eyes began to focus, taking in my surroundings. It was a small bathroom with narrow walls and cracked tiles. My attention shifted to a huddled figure near the sink. As I looked closer, I realized it was a woman. One hand gripped the counter for support, her face a mix of pain and defiance. It took me a moment to recognize her, but it was the woman from the cab, the one Cabman had attacked before. Her eyes widened as she locked onto me. Cabman's voice echoed in my head, his rage bubbling to the surface. She didn't really think she could hide from me, did she? The woman's voice trembled with anger as it cut through the darkness. I knew you were following me. She pointed an accusing finger. I knew you were stalking me. Cabman growled, his frustration spilling out of my mouth like poison. This could have been avoided if you'd just cooperated. All I wanted was your valuables, just that ring. You made this messy, not me. Messy? She retorted, her disdain cutting through the darkness like a knife. What's messier than manipulating my son into giving you information about me? Her voice cracked with hatred. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize your screen name? Cabman. My stomach twisted, sickened by what I was hearing, but Cabman only laughed, his malevolence overtaking my unease. Smart kid, but not smart enough to keep his big mouth shut. I found myself saying, still unable to control my words. You're disgusting, she spat, her eyes welling up with tears. Talking to a child online through a video game to get to me? Do you even know what it's like to see your child terrified every time he logs in? To hear him cry because some nice guy online turned out to be a monster? You're a coward, a predator who preys on children to do your dirty work. She pulled herself up from the floor and started toward the door. I stepped in front of her, blocking her path with the crowbar. Move, she demanded, her voice weak but fierce. I couldn't. As much as I wanted to step aside, I was trapped under Cabman's control. You should have just let me take what I wanted. Now it's time to face your punishment. She shoved me aside, desperately slamming her shoulder into my chest with all of her weight. I stumbled sideways, dropping the crowbar and falling into the sink as my arm struck the mirror above it. The glass shattered on impact, sending shards raining onto the counter and floor. My hand shot forward, grabbing her arm as she reached for the door. I yanked her back with excessive force, throwing her to the floor. She landed hard, clutching her stomach protectively as she tried to catch her breath. That's when I saw it. Her swollen belly. My overwhelming shock battled against Cabman's mounting hatred. You're pregnant, he scowled, his voice thick with malice. Another life for me to ruin for the sins of the mother. In an act of defiant rage, she grabbed a shard of broken glass from the mirror and swung it toward my throat. You're a disgusting pig, she screamed, putting all her might into the attack. My body jerked backward just in time, the shard narrowly missing my carotid artery but slicing deep into my shoulder instead. Pain shot through me, a sharp, searing pain that, for the first time, felt like my pain, not Cabman's. She held the shard tightly, breathing hard as she glared at me. Stay away from me and my family, she screamed. You won't go anywhere near my daughter. Your daughter, I scoffed, feeling Cabman's twisted excitement as a cruel grin was forced across my lips. You'll wish she was never born by the time I'm done with you both. Cabman's desires clouded my mind, consumed by greed, malice, and an unnatural yearning to see her suffer. He was filled with embarrassment and rage. The feeling of humiliation she caused fueled his pursuit of revenge. Nothing would stop him until she felt the same shame he believed she had inflicted on him, until she felt his pain, until her life was destroyed the way he thought she had tried to destroy his. My heart broke for this woman. I could sense her deep hatred for Cabman, but it couldn't rival the relentless hatred he held for her. She didn't deserve this kind of treatment, but she was being forced to fight for her life and the life of her family against an unrelenting monster. I wanted desperately to stop Cabman, to end this nightmare, but I was powerless until this memory played out. Downstairs, heavy footsteps could be heard thundering through the open front door, making their way up the stairs. Police, the house is surrounded, a voice shouted, growing louder with each step. I could feel Cabman's shock. He hadn't expected this. As the light faded from my eyes, the woman's demeanor changed. A fleeting sense of hope manifested across her face. Cabman's rage burned, and as his anger grew, the whispered, chastising voices from before began to swirl inside my head. They were the same voices I had heard in the game. I still couldn't make out what they were saying, but the sheer number of them all speaking at once was overwhelming, making it harder to focus on what was happening. They were angry, chaotic, and impossible to comprehend. Feeling dizzy and disoriented, my thoughts becoming fragmented and isolating. Then the light from the officers' flashlights began to bounce off the peeling wallpaper in the hallway, growing larger and brighter with every step they took closer to the bathroom. My body leapt forward without my control. Cabman sent me charging headlong toward the window, forcing me to hurl myself through it. Shards of broken glass tore into my legs and hands as I collapsed onto the fire escape. I staggered to my feet, blood dripping from my palms, while shouts and pounding footsteps closed in behind me. Without a second thought, my body turned toward the metal stairs, every movement dictated by Cabman's desperate need to escape. Behind me, I heard the cops clamoring around the woman, followed by a sharp clicking noise. I never deviated from my path, sprinting down the first flight of steps. Pain shot through my shoulder with each step. The blood loss made it harder to maintain my balance, but I forced myself to keep moving. Just as I turned the corner to the second set of steps, an ear-splitting shot rang out. the hot, piercing sting of steel burrowing itself into my left forearm. I faltered, my body dropping onto the grated staircase. I tried to shield my face as I fell, realizing that for that brief moment, the shock of the bullet piercing my arm had given me back control to my body. I had never experienced pain this before. The sting of the bullet burned through muscle and bone. My vision became clouded, and I could barely process the agony before a heavy weight dropped on top me. "Stay down." The officer's voice was loud, controlled, but I could hear the strain in it. He pressed his knee into my back, forcing my cheek against the cold metal of the fire escape. Cabman wouldn't let me stop. Even as the officer pinned me down, his rage still pulsed through me like an unrelenting force, refusing to surrender. My hearing was muffled, but I could make out the crackle of the officer's radio. "Suspect is on the fire escape. Shots fired." Before he could finish his sentence, I jerked my body as hard as I could. The officer swayed precariously but maintained his grip, feeling his gun burrowing into my back. My arm was throbbing, but adrenaline overpowered the pain. I had to get free. The radio crackled again. "Dispatch to all units. The victim has been identified as 35-year-old Abigail Davis. Abigail is being transported by EMT. She's going into labor. Repeat, Abigail Davis is in labor. The baby is stable for now, but the mother is in distress." Davis. The name hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest, my pulse quickening. I know that name, Davis. Abigail meant nothing to me, but Davis was Zoe's last name. The officer loosened his grip slightly to respond to his radio. "Suspect in custody, requesting backup for transport." Cabman seized the opportunity. My leg kicked out instinctively, searching for an opening. I managed to trap one of the officer's legs with mine, driving my knee into his side and pushing with all my strength to throw him off balance. Rain started to fall as the officer fell backward, losing his grip on me, his gun slipping from his grasp and sliding across the slick metal of the fire escape. I watched in slow motion as it spun just out of reach. My heart pounded furiously. Between beats, my good hand stretched desperately, fingers clawing for the gun. The officer struggled to regain his footing, but by the time he realized my intent, it was too late. My fingertips skimmed the cold, slick metal as I fumbled for a grip. My hand danced along the barrel, twisting frantically to turn the handle toward me. The brief glimmer of control the officer had felt drained from him as he charged at me, his eyes widening in sudden panic. I saw the fear spread across his face, my own dread mirroring his, and pooling in my stomach as I fought against the reality of what I knew was coming. His hands clamped down on the gun, yanking furiously to rip it from my grasp. I held on, my muscles aching as we wrestled back and forth. He bared his teeth, grunting through clenched jaw as he tried again to pry it away. I dug in, retreating just enough to create space, both of us breathing heavily. My fingers grazed the trigger. The sensation was so foreign to me. It felt wrong, unnatural. The officer's eyes narrowed, realizing the tables had turned. My anguish was too much to bear, and I didn't want to see what was about to unfold. The balance had shifted. He hesitated, but Cabman didn't. I pulled the trigger. The gunshot cracked like the sound of thunder in the alley. The officer's face twisted in shock and dismay as he staggered backward, his hand clutching his stomach. His legs buckled as he collapsed onto the metal grating, the rainwater slowly dripping down his motionless frame. I scrambled to my feet, barely aware of the blood soaking through my sleeve, or the way the officer groaned in pain behind me. My legs moved on their own, pushing forward, down the fire escape, across the pavement toward the cab. This is the story of the most terrifying set of circumstances that I have ever lived through, and I hope nothing will ever top it, but I may not be so lucky. I hope that relating this down and sharing it may help me make some more sense out of what has been happening, or at the very least help me share the burden with someone else. I've changed names and been vague about locations for anonymity, but here is my story written down in as much detail as I can remember. This all surrounds a trip that I took to my family's ranch at the end of last summer. I had taken the time off college to work and save some money for the next semester. I live in Idaho, but my family owns a decent-sized ranch in eastern Oregon. Both to help out the family and make some money, I usually spend at least a few weeks out of the summer working there each year. I love the time out in the fields and forests, away from the bustle of urban life. For this trip, I had planned to spend about 2 weeks there staying with my uncle, aunt, and cousins who live there. I was leaving on a Sunday, but because of some unexpected things coming up, I didn't get on the road until after 8 p.m., which meant it would be getting dark as I drove. I wasn't too worried, though, as I had made the drive several times and knew every turn by heart. The drive is about 4 hours and feels like a departure from one world into another, from the cities and suburbs to where you can go for miles and only see the light of the stars in your headlights. I listened to the radio for the whole drive. I grew up on radio, and my car doesn't have Bluetooth anyway, so it works out. I can pick up the Idaho stations for most of the way, but the second half usually has a slimmer selection of stations as the rolling hills start to break up the signal. This led to the first weird occurrence. At this point in the drive, the sun had long since set. The empty, rolling landscape, decorated only by sagebrush, wire fences, and the occasional stream, stretched out into darkness on either side, with the lonely ribbon of road running before me. My headlights aren't LED, so I only had a modest amount of warm light in front of me to see by. Whatever station I had been listening to had finally gotten too static-filled for me to pretend that it was intelligible, so I pressed the seek button on my radio. This makes it roll through all of the FM frequencies until it finds a station with a strong enough signal to stop on. The numbers wound up quickly on the display until it looped back around to the bottom and worked its way back up. Finally, the numbers froze on a station. I wish I could remember the number. The only phrase that came through was, "Satanic manifestations." That startled me a bit. After a pause, the speaker continued. It turned out to be some radio pastor rambling on about these manifestations interrupting his broadcast. I let out a nervous laugh. It was kind of funny to me that those were the first words it happened to pick up, but it was still a bit unsettling. The drive kept going as normal, with me peering out into the night to make out the road lines. By this point, I was less than an hour away from the ranch. I was trying to enjoy a somewhat broken-up Michael Jackson song when another station crackled into clarity. This happens when two stations use similar frequencies. Their ranges can sometimes overlap a bit and cause you to pick up both on top of each other. What caught my attention was that the other station was broadcasting the emergency alert system tone, which is like a series of grating and drawn-out beeps. Seriously, just look up ES alert system sound and tell me that it wouldn't freak you out a bit to hear it when you're driving through the forest alone at night. Even more concerning was that the station faded away again before I could hear what the alert was even for. At this point, I was just trying to get to the ranch as quickly as safety would allow so I could get this over with. The rest of the drive passed fairly uneventfully, although I did still feel a bit uneasy as I drove up the gravel driveway and pulled up to the guest house that I would be staying in. Fortunately, a night of rest helped with that, and by the next day I had almost forgotten both occurrences, only thinking about how they might make for a good story. I left them in this account in case anybody thinks there's some kind of connection between them and what happens later, but we'll get into that. The first few days of ranch work were enjoyable. Most days I would just be walking in the forest alone fixing fences, which may sound foreboding given the context that I'm sharing this in, but at the time it was honestly a lot of fun. I would just pack a lunch, drive a few miles out on the property, and spend the day enjoying the pleasant weather and forests of reaching pine trees. We keep several hundred head of cattle at our ranch, so we need plenty of fenced property to rotate them through so that they always have enough grass to eat. The ranch takes in a lot of area ranging from marshy lowlands to rocky and tree-lined ridges, much of which can only be traversed on foot. Every year, elk break wires jumping over the fences or trees fall and flatten them, so it all needs regular maintenance. It's not particularly exciting, but like I said, the time outside was wonderful. I could walk and work all day without seeing anyone. The area has had some sketchy stuff happen. A ranch hand from another ranch once told me a story about finding a cooler full of cocaine in a culvert. Apparently, a major drug trade route connecting Mexico with Canada runs through the area, so sometimes stuff happens. But while smuggled drugs are pretty easy to explain, some stuff is not. Which leads me to the mutilations. One morning we got a call from our neighbor. They lived miles away, but we shared a property line, about a bull that they had found dead in a field bordering ours. They wanted us to take a look at it, so we hopped in the truck and drove over and out into the field. They were parked out in the sagebrush, and as I got closer, I could see the corpse of the bull lying on the ground. The normally stocky animal now looked like the mammalian equivalent of a rotting pumpkin. When I took a closer look, it only got worse. The eyes were just gaping black sockets, and the lips had been completely stripped away to reveal only grinning yellow teeth. Our neighbor told us that the tongue and testes were also missing, Perhaps strangest of all, the wounds looked more like deliberately precise cuts than the tearing bites of animals. No blood either, he said. Not a drop as far as I could see. He was right. Despite the multiple missing body parts, the ground looked clean. The grass wasn't even matted or torn as if the animal had thrashed around. I have seen dead animals before, but this was just eerie. In the end, we couldn't come to any conclusions as to what might have happened to the bull. This spot was well away from both our house and the neighbors, so neither of us had heard or seen anything at all. There had been 6 living bulls the day before, now there were 5. It can be a serious financial blow to a ranch to lose a breeding bull. It's more than just the value of the single animal. The potential calves it could sire with its certain genetic traits are also factored in. For cattle, horses, and other animals, the market for genetic material is fairly lucrative. We could really sympathize with our neighbor, but there didn't seem to be anything that could be done except to call the sheriff to examine the scene, so we left. My uncle and I chatted on the drive back to the ranch house, and I was surprised to learn that this was by no means an isolated incident. Just look up Oregon cattle mutilations if you want to see more, but don't go to images if you don't want to see anything graphic. It's not just Oregon either. For decades, there have been instances of cattle, often bulls, dying mysteriously, with body parts removed with seemingly deliberate precision. Some people say it's aliens, and while I never believed that, the truth is that once you get out and see some stuff in the more isolated places of the world, stuff that most people will never see in their lives, it can be pretty hard to come up with any rational explanation. Life at the ranch went on as usual. We didn't hear anything more about the bull, and I almost forgot about it. Several nights later, my cousin Liam and I went out after sunset to hunt coyotes, since they can be a threat to the young calves, and we had had a few births that week. My uncle bought both a thermal rifle scope and a thermal monocular to help hunt them in the dark, since night or early morning is the best time. I've been out working until sunset many times, and just about every night around then you can hear the coyotes calling to each other from the hills and forests, not in harmony like wolves, but more like some crazy war cry. It can be pretty unsettling, but you feel a lot safer with a rifle in your hands. They are also much smaller than wolves and don't really pose a threat to adult humans, since they usually flee at the first sign of one. It gets cold out there quickly after the sun goes down, even in the summer, so we layered up before heading out. The chill night wind swept across the unseen sagebrush while the stars twinkled faintly above. We drove out to the big hay barn at the center of the fields before setting out on foot. The field we were scouting is a rectangle, not quite a mile from east to west and half that north to south, with the south fence going right up to the trees and the edge of our property. We were laying flat on the dirt road running across the north end of the field, looking south towards the woods about 600 yards away. The only thing we could see without our thermal optics were the night sky and the distant lights of the ranch house, but through them, the darkened landscape showed up in spectral black and white. The warmer something is, the more white it appears with the thermal, while the coldest things are pure black. You can look up videos of white-hot thermal on YouTube to get a better idea of what I'm talking about. The details weren't incredibly crisp, but it was enough to distinguish between a cow and a coyote. As any hunter will tell you, hunting is a lot of waiting. We laid there for at least 30 minutes, slowly rolling between laying on our backs and our stomachs to see all around us. It was fully dark now, with the horizon above where the sun had set showing only fading traces of lighter sky while the cold stars wheeled by. Finally, I spotted a lone coyote slink out of the dense forest past the fence to the south and lope along the tree line. I had the monocular, so my cousin brought the rifle around to line up a shot. It was still further away than we wanted to shoot for, so we decided to wait for it to come closer in search of lone calves. Even with it so far away, we were taking every precaution to stay undetected, speaking in the lightest of whispers and pressing ourselves flat to the earth, only just peering over the rise of the dirt road. Suddenly, the coyote jerked its head to look behind it, then darted off back into the forest, quickly vanishing from sight. I sighed in frustration. We had already been out here in the cold for a while, and I was really hoping to nail that one and go home. If it didn't come back soon, we would just have to go home to bed without success, since we would still have to get up for work early in the morning. My cousin told me to keep watch in case it came back while he scoped out the fields to the north of us. I was diligently scanning the distant digital tree line when I came across the most creepy, uncanny thing I have ever seen. Just past the fence, weaving through the last trees at the edge of the woods, were 6 people. They were moving steadily and purposefully in a line, and I couldn't see their faces. The thing that was so creepy is that no one should have been there. Not only was it after dark, but the people who owned that property south of us had it for a vacation cabin that they only seldom used, and I knew for a fact that they weren't there. There was no reason for 6 people to be out there marching through the dark. I frantically tapped Liam's shoulder and pointed him in the direction of the people. He followed my gesture through his scope, following all necessary gun safety. I knew when he saw them too because he breathed out a quiet, "What the?" before looking back over at me. "Who are they?" I asked in a frantic whisper. "I don't know. I can't think of anyone else who would be out here." "Well, where could they be going?" We kept watching to find out. They were moving steadily east, and it looked like they were carrying things. Without warning, they all stopped, standing as if frozen in place. It looked like they were looking around. Then, just as quickly as they had appeared, they melted back into the black shadows of the trees. The forest was still and dark. "What should we do?" I asked, still not daring to talk above a whisper. "I don't know. I mean, it's not our property, so it's not like we can really do anything about it. Maybe those were just the people who live there." "No way, man," I responded. "And what would they be doing tramping around in the forest at night and without any lights either?" "I don't know. I think we should just go back to the house," Liam answered nervously. "No matter who they were, they definitely scared off all the coyotes. They probably won't come back for hours." We slowly crawled back from the road, then walked back in a crouch to the truck. I kept looking over my shoulder with the monocular, but I didn't see or hear a thing. We drove back to the house and went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. This was supposed to be our private oasis, and the thought of these mysterious strangers stalking around in the dark seemed like a violation of that privacy, even though we hadn't seen them come onto our property. I just couldn't shake that eerie feeling that the whole experience had given me. When we told my uncle in the morning, he just said, "Huh," and nothing more, though it didn't seem like he had any more of an explanation than we did. We had breakfast and got started with the morning work as usual, working through until lunchtime. When I came back to the house for lunch, I could see that my uncle was upset about something, and he didn't waste any time sharing. Our neighbor had found another dead bull that morning, in a similar state of mutilation to the first one, missing body parts with apparently purposeful cuts. Worse yet, it had been found in the same field as before, just east of us, and I immediately remembered that the people I had seen the night before had been moving east, and could have easily been headed to that field. I brought this up to him. "Yeah, I thought of that too. I don't know if there's any way they are connected, but there's no way that it's not suspicious." To sum up the rest of that day, we told our neighbor about the people in the woods, and he called the sheriff's department to report the new incident. From what we heard from our neighbor, the sheriff just said to maybe move the cattle somewhere where they could keep a better eye on them and check the fences, which we all thought was a pretty stupid answer, given that we had 2 witnesses of a group of mysterious people in the area the previous night. Even so, we spent the rest of the day working through the pouring rain and thick mud to move our bulls into the pasture right between the guest house, where I was staying, and the main house so that we could keep a closer watch on them. While we were working, I was talking to Liam and my other cousin Gavin about everything that had happened and our theories about the mutilations and the people in the woods. Apparently, one of the other popular explanations for the bull attacks historically are cults that harvest the organs for rituals. This probably came about because of the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s, but in my mind it would explain the mysterious people, certainly better than aliens. On top of that, Liam said he had heard of a cave in the area where a cult gathered to do cult stuff. He had never been to that particular cave himself, and it could just be local superstitions and ghost stories. But to me, it just added to the rest of the circumstantial evidence, as well as calling to mind the weird radio experience from my drive there. Either way, the rest of what happened might help to draw a final conclusion. The following night, I was at the guest house I was sharing with Gavin, getting ready for bed. We each had our own room, with the window of mine looking out to the small front porch. I closed the blinds since there was a bright light in the center of the yard in front of the house, but one of the slats was broken off at the end, leaving a small square gap to the outside. I was still having trouble falling asleep and tossed and turned for an hour. As I rolled over once more to try and get comfortable, I saw an eye looking through the gap. I yelped and fell out of bed. I grabbed the revolver from my nightstand, but didn't think I was actually going to use it. There was no telling who was out there. Instead, I yelled to Gavin in the other room to wake up. "What is it?" I heard him grumble. "There's someone on the porch. They're looking through the window," I yelled, my voice cracking in fright. Before I could say anything else, a rock crashed through the window, sending the blinds swinging wildly and shards of glass all over the bed and carpet. I screamed again and crawled backward to the door as fast as I could. My cousin threw open his door, now wide awake from the noise. We both retreated into his room and slammed the door, hearing footsteps on the front porch. He checked his window looking out on the back porch, but didn't see anything. We then called my uncle in the main house to ask for help. After a couple of long minutes, we heard the truck roll up in front of the house and saw beams from their lights illuminating the interior. Both of us still in our pajamas, we stepped outside onto the front porch to meet him. Liam was with him and they both had rifles, but there was no one else in sight. If it wasn't for the shattered window, you would never know someone had been there. Or that's what I thought until Liam shined his flashlight on the ground. All around the guest house, there were hundreds of trampled footprints in the mud, crossing over each other in a confused ring. I knew for certain that we had not made these tracks. I hadn't gone around the house all day. I don't know if they were from lots of people or just one who'd been pacing around the house incessantly, and I don't know which one freaked me out more. We were all pretty spooked, but we loaded up into our 2 trucks with spotlights and proceeded to search the entire area around the houses. We looked for over an hour but didn't find anything. The whole property had foot and hoof prints all over from the day's work, which kept us from being able to find out where the tracks around the guest house may have come from or gone off to. After a while, we all just returned back to the main ranch house to try and get some sleep. Gavin and I dragged out sleeping bags and slept fitfully on the floor. For now, that's about all I have to tell. First thing the next morning, we reported the incident to the sheriff's department, but I wasn't going to stick around any longer than I had to. I gave my statement over the phone and left my number with the station before packing up to leave. Call me a coward, but I wasn't going to stay another night at the property. I told my aunt, uncle, and cousins that we had plenty of room for them in Idaho if they wanted to get out of there too. But they wanted to stay at their home, so I didn't push them. The daylight drive back home was uneventful, and I kept the radio off the whole way. I slept better that night knowing I had put a few hundred miles between me and the eye watching me through the window. I was still shaken up for a while, and it's not until I've written all of this out that I've really come to terms with everything that happened. The more I've written, the more I'm sure of one thing. I need to go back to the ranch. Something is happening out there that we've only scratched the surface of. Something that is threatening my family and their livelihood, not to mention the other ranchers in the valley. The only way that I'll truly be able to have peace is to figure out who is stalking the woods, who is watching my family, and what is happening to the bulls at night. So a bit of background, I've worked in hotels for a little over 4 years, and I've met a lot of people. I work at the front desk, and my hotel is right next to a mall. I think if you've ever worked hotels, you know the types of weirdos we can get. Tweakers, Karens, and people who talk to the air. You know what I mean? I've worked at this hotel for just about a year and seen all these types of people in spades. I've had to call the cops more times than I'd like on people who decide it's okay to just sit in the lobby screaming at me that they don't have anywhere else to go. It sucks. But to the point. Today I was working my typical morning shift. I'm a college student, so I was pretty much just on my personal laptop all day clicking around Blackboard for whatever assignment seemed the least hellish to work on. I like to think that I'm pretty good at hearing people coming. I mean, most people aren't exactly quiet about walking up to me. Sometimes, though, someone sneaks up and I don't notice until an awkward amount of time has passed. This time, a man was standing in front of me. I mean, usually it's women who sneak up or kids, but this was a man. Whatever, I apologize for not seeing him and ask how I can help. A typical, "Hi, sir, I'm so sorry I didn't see you, how can I help you?" His voice was weird. It's hard to pin down what I mean by that. You might have honestly just had to be there, but I'll try. It wasn't coming from his throat, like voices come up through the throat and then out through the mouth in whatever direction they are facing. You know when someone is talking in a different direction than where you are? The voice goes in that direction and you have to sort of catch the tail end of it. This guy didn't sound like that. I mean, he was facing me, but his voice wasn't coming in like a stream of sound at me. It came sort of all around him, like a 3D speaker, I think, if the boomy bits went all around and still worked the same. I hope you understand what I mean. He asked for a room, no big deal, that's literally my job. I'm getting paid to make reservations for people. The voice thing continued throughout the entire interaction. How many nights? 2. How many adults? 1. Any children? No. Do you have AAA or are you a part of the military? No. He sort of hesitated here, which wasn't a big deal in the moment, but like, looking back at it after this whole interaction, it kind of adds to the whole thing. I tell him the nightly breakdown, and then the total, and then how much we hold, including a security deposit. Okay. So I ask him for his ID and credit card. Then the sort of next weird thing happens. His wallet is just on the desk, like, it wasn't there and then it was. And the desk is not very big and I was looking directly at him. He didn't move to take his wallet out of his pocket or anything. He was sort of eerily still. Not a statue or anything, just very, very still. I don't know. Maybe I blinked too long or something. I'm running off like 3 hours of sleep here, guys, and I'm normally at a beautiful 9.5. Then he sort of stared at me for a bit. Not too long to where I had to say anything, but just long enough that I started to feel uncomfortable. Then he blinked, like he realized something, and went to open his wallet and grab his ID and credit card. It took him a while to do that too. So he handed me the cards. It took him way too long to find either of them, but like his wallet looked pretty empty from what I could see. And I made him the reservation. It was pretty early in the day for check-ins. I want to say it was like 10:30ish. Normal check-in time at most places is like 3 p.m. So I had to let him know that there would be an early check-in fee if he wanted to check in now. Again, this dude was so quiet and still. It was really unnerving. Finally, he just sort of nods and I ask him, "You want to check in now?" "Yes." So I get started on checking him in. I get it done in the computer. His card runs fine. With weird guests, I am always concerned that the card will not in fact run fine. And I print out the paperwork for him to sign. I highlight the lines I need filled out, and as I am doing it, I can feel his eyes on me. More than how that phrase normally means. It felt like someone was pushing their eyes through my skin or something. So weird. Anyways, I let him know to fill out the highlighted lines, and he again stares at the paper for a really long time. Then he looks back up to me. Okay, weird. Like this whole interaction is weird and it's giving me the heebie-jeebies. I just say something like, "I'll just make your room keys while you fill that out." A miniature rant interlude here. No guests are ever able to see the pens we display for them to use. We have this little jar with beads in it and the pens kind of stick out the top. They are on top of the desk, more to the corner. I think they look nicer in a corner, but they aren't hidden. They aren't being blocked by anything. They are there for the world to see, but no one ever sees them. It's so annoying. Sometimes I just grab a pen for them and place it on the paper because they will sit looking everywhere, but where the pens are. I know it's a small thing, but God, it's annoying. Anyways, all that to say, I thought this guy couldn't see the pens. So I grab a pen for him, place it on top of the paper, and go about my business making his keys. Note for you guys, if you're ever traveling alone and you know it says so on the reservation, but the hotel employee gives you 2 keys. It's just hardwired into our brains that way. The average amount of travelers in a room is 2, even if it's not listed that way on the reservation, so we make 2 just in case. Plus sometimes one of the keys is busted. So I finish making the keys. I could swear I never saw him move during the time I was doing this. I don't think I heard any clothes rustling either. And then give him the basic breakdown of the hotel. Your room is on this floor, elevators are that way past breakfast, these are the breakfast times, this is the pool hours, and checkout is 12. You know, basic stuff. The details don't vary that much between hotels. Then he says, "I know." Which, okay, is not that weird if you've stayed at this hotel before. It's annoying, but not weird. But I looked up his name in our system. If he stayed here before, his name would have popped up. It didn't. Also, on the topic of his name, it was super weird. Not like foreign or anything, or at least I don't think if it wasn't from any country I've ever seen. I don't know. Maybe I just don't recognize the language. So I go to hand him the keys, and again, he's super weird about it. Just slow, lots of staring at me or the keys, and then the keys are gone. Like not in my hands, but I don't see them in his. Like the wallet a little bit. Oh, the wallet is gone by this point too. Never saw him put it in his pocket, just gone. And the pen is in the same place I put it when I set it on his paperwork. I know that he could have placed it back in relatively the same place when he was done, but I don't know, it looked like the exact same spot. Finally, I grab his papers and look down to make sure it's all filled out. And when I look back up, he's gone. I don't want to harp on this too much because I feel like I've already mentioned it a few times, but I didn't hear him move. He was there and then he wasn't. I would have seen if he went to go grab his bags, he didn't have any with him, and would have heard if he walked out to go to the elevator. It's just a sensory input thing that becomes second nature when you've been somewhere long enough. But he was just gone. Then, the absolute weirdest part. It felt like maybe 30 seconds after I looked up and he was gone, and the phone rang. His room number was calling the front desk. At first I was a bit panicked because I thought housekeeping wasn't actually done with the room and I sent him to a dirty one. I've had literal nightmares of this happening. It's a nightmare when it happens in real life too. But still, I answer the phone the same way I always do. It's like the whole 2-card scenario from earlier, just hardwired into us hotel folk. Thank you for calling the front desk. How can I help you? I'm expecting a housekeeper on the other end. It's silent. Hello? Silence. Hello? I always drag out the last hello, I don't know why. Then I heard something that almost made me jump out of my skin. Just breathing. The sound of breathing, but not from the phone. Like someone is standing right behind me, breathing down my neck. For a lack of better words, I whipped around. I don't know what I was expecting to see. I'm all alone up at the desk, guys. But whatever I expected to see just wasn't there. An empty desk, just like always. But the breathing, it was still there. I kept turning around because the breathing is right on my neck. Then I hear the dial tone. Whoever or whatever called the desk hung up. I haven't seen him again today. I've already clocked out and raced home to type this up in the comfort of my bed. I had housekeeping go check the room to see if he was in there. Apparently he was. I also checked the camera before I left. It's sort of janky, like needs to be updated because the quality sucks and the UI is horrible kind of janky. The whole situation, which was maybe 10 minutes tops, is there on the camera. A couple of moments of camera fuzz where it's hard to see anything, so I didn't get any clarity on the wallet, pen, or disappearing act things. There's even the moments of me turning in circles like an idiot with the phone cord pulling the phone box around. I didn't hear anything else weird from housekeeping when they checked on the room, and there isn't really anything else for me to try and, I don't know, investigate. Just a really weird interaction with a really weird man. Sorry if it's a bit boring, it was a lot more intense in the moment. Just felt I needed to share it with some people who might understand more of what was going on. Share your thoughts if you have any, or if any other front desk agents have been through something similar, I would love to know. I'll update if anything weird happens tomorrow. I raised my hand and touched my lip. It was bleeding slightly, and I could taste the iron on my tongue. I had been biting the skin on my lips all day. Maybe I was nervous. I lowered my arm when I spotted something in the field. I stopped and reached for my shotgun. Quiet, I whispered to the dog. It was the same thing I had said countless times before, but still the dog looked up at me joyously. A dozen times had I tried to train the mutt to sit or heel, and the creature would simply stare at me, head tilted with the same blank expression. I could swear the dog had no concept of the world around it, nothing more than a childish sense of joy and wonder. It looked to the field, then back at me and barked. Hey, hey, I put my finger to my lips. Shh. The sun was almost down. A flock of pheasants had been sitting out in the clearing. It would have been the last clear shot I was going to get. By this point it was no use. The birds had already flown too high, and there was no way we would find more before the sun had gone down. I shook my head. Fine, come on. Let's go home, boy. But no jerky for you, got it? I said. I knew the dog couldn't understand what I was saying, but I suppose I liked to pretend it did. Even if it just sat there, tail wagging and tongue lolling out, it was better than no one listening at all. The sun had begun to set as the first sight of the farm came into view. I felt a sense of relief, the kind one feels after a long day of hard labor. I couldn't wait to sit down and eat a nice bowl of stew, though maybe if I had been able to shoot a bird or two, I could have had that instead. As I walked over a small hill, I noticed the dog had stopped. I turned back. The mutt stood stiff, ears pointed straight forward, staring off into the woods. Come on, boy, let's go inside. It's getting late, I said, snapping my fingers and whistling. I looked in the direction the dog was staring. It was getting increasingly harder to see. I squinted as I peered through the trees. Still, I could see nothing. "Hey, you hear me? We're going home, remember? Don't go running off like you do," I said, turning back to the dog. The mutt took a few hesitant steps backward, and then faced me once more with wide eyes. It made a strange sound, something between a bark and a whimper, but eventually started trotting after me once more. As I sighed and took my first step after turning around, the point of my boot caught something on the ground. The snow had already covered most of the ground in a light layer, and the soil was wet and muddy beneath it. The mud stuck to my elbows as I attempted to stop myself from falling face first. I cursed under my breath. I cursed at the dog. I thought it had walked in front of me, but upon turning around I saw it sitting next to me, staring with its ears flat against its head. It let out a whine, and then took a few hesitant steps in the other direction before quickly turning back to look at the forest. I turned my head slowly. The snow wasn't thick enough to obscure whatever it was I had stumbled over. As soon as I recognized what it was, my breath caught in my throat. I froze. It was so close and appeared in such detail that at first it didn't seem real. Then my senses returned to me. I scrambled away, crawling backward and kicking the mud with my boots as I distanced myself. Look, as a farmer, I am no stranger to slaughter. But I assure you that this was no normal, humane killing. The level of malice, hatred, and intelligence required to kill in such a way was beyond the limits of even the most terrible predators I know. The head was nowhere to be found, and the entire sight was enough to force me to turn my head and vomit. The fact that it had been one of the goats from my farm, and had been killed only a short distance from my house, almost made it feel like it had been purposefully placed for me to find. With that thought, I suddenly remembered why we had stopped in the first place. I looked up and saw the dog standing a few paces ahead of me, facing the same direction as before. Its ears were still flat, and it was trembling slightly, staring into the woods and whining quietly. Now, I am not a superstitious man, nor have I ever been prone to believing in nonsense, but I swear that at that moment, when I looked out into the woods in the dim light, a chill wind blew in from the forest and a terrible stench came with it. It smelled like rot, yet came from the forest, and not from the cadaver before me. The temperature fell, and I shivered. I slowly and cautiously rose to my feet, trying my best not to make a sound as I reached for the shotgun strapped to my back. I could hardly see anything now that the sun had gone down, but nevertheless I watched the edge of the forest, holding the gun against me and keeping the barrel pointed toward the brush. As I slowly retreated in the direction of the cabin, I was far too nervous to take my eyes off of the area where the dog was staring, but every nerve in my body ordered me to sprint back home and lock the door shut. Until, at last, I heard something rustle the bushes in the forest. You can call me dramatic if you wish, especially considering the fact that I had a loaded Remington 870 in my arms, but the truth was that I simply couldn't stand it anymore, and every ounce of dignity left my body as I ran full speed toward the cabin, feeling the presence of something piercing my back for the entire length of the journey. I felt so unusually frightened that I didn't even open the fence gate that separated the clearing from the farm, opting instead to throw myself over the wooden posts and continue until reaching the front porch. The dog flew past me before I could even make it up the steps, but I soon threw the door open and instantly dashed inside. I quickly let the dog inside as well, and without thinking twice, slammed the door shut. I scrambled around the keychain on the rack by the front door for an uncomfortably long period of time, searching frantically for the right key and fumbling with it in the lock before finally securing the door. I took a deep breath, leaning my back against the wall and sliding to the floor, still gripping the shotgun with both hands. I touched my lips. They were bleeding again. I cursed. The pain in my lip distracted me temporarily, and as my breathing and heart rate stabilized, I admit, I couldn't help but feel slightly embarrassed. After all, it was entirely possible that I had allowed my overworked mind to run wild, and that the carcass had not, in fact, been the work of some maniacal creature. I thought to myself that perhaps it was merely a bear or a cougar, and that the dim light had simply exaggerated the condition of the goat. I chuckled slightly to myself, but my chuckle soon evolved into outright laughter. Now, when was the last time we used that key, huh, boy? I spoke to the dog in between fits of laughter. Ain't nothing but possums and squirrels out here. I swear to God, never even thought to lock a door, and yet here we are, scared shitless, aren't we, boy? My laughter eventually settled into something in between coughing and chuckling. I rubbed my eyes. Then as I finally began to settle down, something made me pause. A sound coming from outside. I listened closely for the sound I had heard a second ago. That's when I heard it again. A soft scratch at the door. The smile was wiped from my face in an instant. Then a whine behind the closed door. The dog, my dog, was on the porch, barking, scratching, and whining at the door, and yet I could vividly remember letting the mutt inside the cabin and locking the door behind it. Every ounce of blood drained from my skin. My body refused to turn and face the dim interior of the cabin, but I could already see in the corner of my eye that the dog I had let inside was no longer behind me. My eyes scanned the room, but it was far too dark to see what was in the hallway. I could only see darkness. That's when I recognized two possibilities. Either there is nothing in the darkness, or there is. My question was answered. I heard something in the hallway. I said to you before that I'm not usually a fearful person, nor was I ever in a situation before this that truly struck fear into my heart. But when I realized that it was not my dog that was inside the cabin with me, I felt a sensation I had never experienced before, and I pray to God, will never experience again. It was not a rational fear. It was as if some awful memory had just awoken from a deep 1,000-year sleep. A primal fear that had hibernated through generations and was now screaming deep within my mind. At that moment I felt, for lack of a better word, exactly like prey. The sound, it sounded nothing, absolutely nothing like my dog. It was almost as if someone with a hoarse, grating voice had attempted to mimic the sound of a panting canine. But all that had come out was an awkward, unnatural, and almost human impression. I could not see what was in the hallway. The image of the goat lying beneath the dim light flashed into my mind. There was no doubt in my mind that the thing responsible for the gruesome sight was standing before me. But then the eerie panting ended abruptly. "Quiet," it whispered. The word had come out as a heavy, unnatural groaning, as if a sick, elderly man had forced a word through a sore throat. Yet at the same time, there was nothing human about it whatsoever. It breathed out, "Shh." The voice was so unnatural and distorted that it was difficult to distinguish whether the speaker understood what it was attempting to say, or whether it was simply mouthing the syllables and breathing out. The thing took a few steps forward and floorboards creaked in the hallway. It sounded like the paws of a dog, the nails tapping the hard surface with a click, 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 click. It stopped. Let's go home, boy." It breathed. My blood ran cold and my body tensed in realization as I recognized the words I had spoken to the dog mere minutes before. "Go home, getting lat." The thing's voice collapsed and it made a long, gargled, choking sound as if it were trying to cough up something lodged in its throat. "Too dark for hunting," it finally croaked. I couldn't stand it anymore. Without a moment of thought, I opened my eyes, raised the gun, and pulled the trigger. I had aimed in the direction of the sound, but I hadn't seen the target. Still, the shotgun boomed, and birdshot sprayed the interior of the house. The sound of the blast was still ringing in my ears, and I was struggling to focus my eyes. My hands were shaking so violently that it was difficult to keep the gun steady. For a moment, I began to worry that I had overreacted, and perhaps I should have investigated further before firing. Still, I stood up, pulled the slide on the gun, and waited, staring at the empty space in the center of the room. "Shh." Not a second later, something wrapped around my leg and squeezed. I turned the gun down, but before I could process what was happening, the claw pulled my leg out from under me and I fell onto the hardwood floor. The grip tightened and fingers dug into my leg. It was not a claw at all. It was a hand. A burning, searing pain shot up my calf. I cried out and in desperation pointed the barrel of the gun at the black space beneath the dinner table where the hand had come from. But before I could get my finger on the trigger, I was pulled forward. My head hit the edge of the table. I felt a jarring pain in my forehead. I had managed to hold onto the gun somehow and fired in the direction of the darkness. As soon as the gun went off, the hand released my leg. I quickly scrambled backward, pulling the slide and sending another shell into the chamber. My leg was throbbing and I could feel a warm trickle of blood running down my forehead. I still couldn't see anything in the pitch-black room, but the sound of a dog's breathing was clear and unmistakable. I pulled the trigger and fired once more in the direction of the sound. The flash lit up the room just long enough for me to see a figure sitting under the table. I was convinced for just a second that this was a nightmare. I knew it could not be real. The proportions were all wrong. The legs were far too long and thin. The torso was too tall and wide. Though it sat in the position of a dog, it seemed almost like some misshapen, emaciated cadaver. Its neck, however, was long and thin. I followed the neck until it ended. I saw a chin, not a snout. Though it was too dark to know for sure, I saw a round head and narrow eyes. It was a human head. On this head, most uncanny of all were its eyes, reflecting pale light, sunken and expressionless. I couldn't even tell where they were focusing. There was just the subtle impression of them seeming cold and far away. It was a blank stare, a sad, hopeless trance, focusing on nothing in particular. I ejected the shell and chambered another, firing again into the darkness. This time the flash revealed nothing. An eerie silence followed the sound. I pulled myself back against the wall, training the gun on the space in front of me. I froze for a moment. I felt melancholic somehow. The creature's eyes, those sad, painful eyes, were burned into my mind. I thought for a moment, had I heard it? Number the birdshot had done little more than slow the thing down. There was no guarantee the next shell would serve the same purpose. That was my concern. Why was I sympathizing with it? I snapped away from my trance. My head was pounding, and my calf felt as if it had been set on fire. I tried to get to my feet, but a jolt of pain shot up from my injured leg. I cried out before losing my balance and collapsing to the floor. "Quiet," the voice whispered directly in my ear. I turned to face the voice, prepared the next shell, and fired. Another empty shell was ejected from the weapon, but the flash revealed nothing but a cloud of smoke and debris. I was down to my last bullet, and my hands were shaking so hard that the gun rattled in my grasp. It was getting difficult to breathe, and a thick, heavy sense of panic was building up in my chest until, at last, I was unable to handle the mounting pressure any longer. I could no longer think straight. The only thing occupying my mind was the image of the goat lying dead in the clearing before the woods. I could not lie on the ground, mutilated and broken like the goat. I refused to become the object of its inhuman, maniacal game. I paused, and the silence was suffocating. My hands reached for the door, and I slowly turned the key. "Fuck you, fuck you," I muttered under my breath as the lock clicked. Don't go running off like you." In an instant, I tightened my grip, lifted the gun, and fired the final shell. Without confirming whether or not the creature had been hit, I pulled out the key, threw the door open, and leapt onto the front porch, shutting and locking the door with electrical speed. Almost immediately after the door had shut, something slammed against it from the other side, shaking the snow off the roof and rattling the windows of the house. I fell on the porch, leaning against the door and trying to hold it shut. The thing, however, did not repeat the action and simply groaned and wheezed, shaking the doorknob on the other side. The sounds continued for a while, but eventually trailed off into the night. It was silent, completely silent. The dog, my real dog, was not on the porch. If the dog had run away, it would have certainly gone to the shed. The dog did not live in the cabin with me. It knew where to go. Besides, I always keep cartridges in the shed. I don't usually hunt elk and find shooting birds more enjoyable. Still, I have a rifle. I use it to take shots at the coyotes that bother the animals every now and again. Never had I thought of using the rifle for self-defense. I made my way to the cabin, dragging my leg behind me. I was exhausted, in pain, and terribly hungry. Maybe it was the fact that I'd spent all day outside, or maybe it was the energy I'd used up in the farmhouse. Whatever the cause, I felt famished and tired, and the walk to the shed was unusually exhausting. I reached the door and noticed it was closed. I stumbled inside and shut the door behind me. Everything was still quiet. The dog was not in the shed. I fell against a wall and slid to the floor. A pain shot up my leg, and I touched the skin. It was an ugly, unnatural color. The pain had subsided considerably, though not enough to allow me to comfortably place weight on the ankle. I felt exhausted. Not only was I exhausted physically, but my head felt heavy. It was either pain, stress, or fear. I shook my head. My eyes blurred and my head turned. I felt as if I were about to pass out. The pain in my leg and the unbearable hunger I still felt were the only things keeping me alert. I was trying so hard to resist falling out of consciousness that I almost forgot why. And then, as I thought I might faint, I heard something disturb the snow outside. My eyes shot open. It had been a soft, almost imperceptible crunch, like a heavy boot landing on a thin pile of snow. My body tensed and I forced myself to stand. I stood in silence, listening. If the thing was outside, I thought, perhaps it was listening as well. I made my way to the shelf where I kept my rifle. The step was soon followed by another, then another, until finally the sound stopped at the door. I took the rifle and loaded it. A few seconds later, I trained the barrel on the door. I began applying pressure to the trigger. I knew I preferred to end the encounter as soon as I could, as opposed to repeating the experience in the farmhouse. The only thing keeping my finger from firing was the notion that maybe, if I remained quiet, it would ignore the shed and search elsewhere. Hello? My thoughts were interrupted. It had been a male voice. It sounded concerned, maybe even slightly uneasy. I thought to lower the gun, but kept the barrel focused on the center of the wooden door. Another period of unbearable silence. Is anyone in there? A hand tightened around the doorknob, then pushed forward. Something, I don't know what, prevented me from firing immediately. Perhaps it was the blue uniform, or the badge which reflected what little light there was, but something about the figure told me to hold back. The man crossed the threshold. Immediately he raised a flashlight. I had been sitting in total darkness, and the unexpected light blinded me entirely. I covered my face with my hand. "Holy shit," I heard someone whisper. "Drop your weapon." The voice snapped suddenly. The voice was strict and stern, and yet I had no intention of releasing the rifle in my arms. He sounded like an officer, he acted like one, and his attire was certainly familiar. Still, I refused to lower the weapon. "I can't," I said softly, almost to myself. I heard the officer shift in his place, then take a step forward. The light was somehow more overpowering than before. "No, step back," I said suddenly. The officer took a step backward. What in God's name happened here? Holy shit. I still couldn't bring myself to face the light. I forced myself to take a few steps backward and lean against the back of the shed, squinting my eyes and turning to face the officer. I thought of an explanation. You wouldn't believe me," I said as the officer took another step back. As my eyes became accustomed to the light, I could make out the man's features. He seemed to have a short beard and a friendly face. His expression was one of concern. He looked at me with narrow, curious eyes, though at the same time he seemed stiff and uneasy. It made me feel uncomfortable. Something felt wrong. I thought for a minute about what it could be. He was scared. He looked at me with disbelief. The officer was terrified. He took a step back occasionally as if he were ready to flee as soon as I lifted a finger. What could I have done to make him act that way? And then for the first time I felt something run down my chin. I raised my arm to touch my face, but it stopped before I expected. It touched something else, something that was not my face. I dropped the rifle to raise a second arm to my cheek. Once again it touched a firm, angled surface. It felt like leather. It was then that I noticed how heavy my head was. I turned to the window. The darkness outside made it especially reflective. I could see myself staring back. I froze. I recognized the sensation as the one from the forest at sunset. Once again, I felt as if I were staring into the woods, into the eyes of something unseen, into the eyes of the butcher from before. I saw the head of a goat, fresh blood still streaming down its face, the eyes reflecting the gleam of the flashlight. No, this couldn't be the reflection. It had to be what was behind the glass. My senses, however, could not lie to me. My hands were touching leather, not skin. I held the head of the goat with my hands and pulled it off. It was heavier than I expected. I realized how tired my neck was as soon as the mask came off. Then I started to think, why was I wearing a mask? My thoughts stopped there. I was interrupted by something else. I was interrupted by my new reflection. What stared back at me in the glass now that my mask was off was something completely unfamiliar. My eyes were sunken and tired. My face was not round at all, but bony and emaciated. I had always had a beard, but beneath my mouth was a stream of dark red liquid. And my skin? My skin was not just pale, it was gray, the color of ash. No, that could not be me. What disturbed me the most, however, were my lips. The reflection in the glass had no lips. Only torn, bleeding strands of flesh hung from the space where the lips should have been. The missing flesh created a gap that allowed me to view the teeth beneath. I froze. I could only stare, absolutely dumbfounded. I was disturbed, disgusted, and utterly overwhelmed. I couldn't even begin to process what I had seen. The smell of rot increased to unbearable levels. The smell made the air sticky, almost slimy. It stuck in my nostrils and burned into my sinuses. I tried to vomit, but all that came out was mucus and spit. My stomach cried. I hadn't eaten in far too long. I turned to the blinding light and raised my arms over my head. Somehow they touched the ceiling. The man was speechless. I never called the police. My voice was trembling. It didn't sound right. Why are you here? The officer was shocked. His face was pale. He stood silent for a few seconds, then spoke. Someone called 2 hours ago. Just then his radio came alive with static. I listened to the white noise until a voice came through. Unit is 25, report. The officer reached for his radio, then brought it to his face. Unit 25 on the scene. I've got possible suspect at gunpoint. Hands up. Suspect is male. Impossibly tall and thin, 7 feet at least. The officer paused, staring at me in shock as if considering what to say. I can't describe it, requesting backup for detainment. Over. Unit 25, copy. The radio went silent. I looked down at my hands. They were thin, unnaturally thin, and the flesh hung from my fingers, and my bones pushed against my skin, pulling it taut and giving the impression of leather. I had to process what had happened. I was interrupted. The radio buzzed. Unit 32 on the scene. House is a mess. 1091D dog. Corpse filled with bullet wounds. Zzz, birdshot. Beneath a table in the kitchen. I fell to my knees. My mind was spinning far too fast for me to stay on my feet. Dog, bullet wounds, birdshot. None of it made sense. Just then I heard a voice through the glass. From the farmhouse. It was the same whisper as before, and yet I heard it differently this time. Let's go inside, it whispered. There was no malice in its voice. It was completely empty. I recognized at that instant that the voice in the farmhouse spoke from everywhere and nowhere. What did you say? The officer took an uneasy step toward me. Air came out, my throat trembled, and what was left of my lips mouthed the syllables. It's getting late. At that moment I was taken for the very first time by absolute hunger. I was and still am unbearably hungry. No matter how much blood I spilled that day, my body only grew thinner and thinner, paler and paler. I can only describe it as total emptiness, famine. We were coming home from my sister's soccer game. We kept asking Dad to stop at McDonald's. He gave us the typical, we have food at home, and money doesn't grow on trees. Talk. I think we were wearing him down. He looked at my mother, whispered something, and started to change lanes. We were getting excited in the back seat. Our house was only a mile or so down the road, and my dad was taking an unexpected turn. We knew not to keep asking at this point. Dad loved little surprises, little deceptions, like when he told me we needed to stop at the bank after school, and instead he brought me to get ice cream. Or the time he woke us up early on a Saturday for a doctor's appointment, only to bring us mini golfing and to the arcade. Mom secretly loved when he did this. She loved how far he would go to surprise us, even if it was just a happy meal. The arrow turned green, and Dad started driving again. I was too busy thinking about what toy would come with my meal. I didn't see anything. I heard Dad shout, "Oh my gee." Then everything went black. I woke up seconds later. At least I felt like it was only seconds later. I wasn't in the car anymore. My vision was fuzzy. The lights were so bright, it felt like I was staring at the sun. I just wanted to wipe the sleep from my eyes, but my body felt like it was 1,000 pounds. I started to feel panicked. I heard a voice say, "Hey buddy, it's okay, easy now." I looked in the direction of the voice. It was a lady. She was purple. My vision was slowly coming back to me. Things around me were starting to take shape. No, she's not purple, it's her shirt. And her pants, it's a nurse. Did Dad really bring us to the doctor's office instead of McDonald's? I know that can't be true, but nothing makes sense right now. I feel the panic inside me growing. It's okay. It's okay. Try to stay calm, you've been through a lot. Your parents will be so happy to know that you're awake. The nurse had a calming voice. I don't know why I'm here, but she makes me feel safe. I have so many questions. I don't know where to start. What happened? Where's my mom? How did I get here? My brain was racing. I tried to speak, but all I could say was, "Wow, what?" The nurse told me that my family was in a car accident. Someone sped through a red light while my dad was turning and crashed into us. She said that we must have an angel looking out for us because everyone in our car survived, and she couldn't say the same for the other car. Apparently, I took the most damage. She says I've been in a coma for 5 days. At first, they didn't believe I was going to make it, but I started showing signs of improvement after the 3rd day. She sat with me another minute or so, then told me she was going to go get my parents. They must have been worried sick. Mom was probably biting her nails to the bone. She always bites her nails when she gets stressed out. I'm sure Dad is blaming himself, even if it wasn't his fault. Jenny must be so scared. She's always been the nervous type. She still comes into my room every time there's a thunderstorm. I'd hate to see how she was when she thought her big brother was going to die. But the nice nurse lady did say that my family survived, and now that I'm awake, that means that everything is going to be okay. Or at least that's what I thought until the door at the hospital opened again. When the nurse walked back into the room, there were two people behind her, a man and a woman. They had bandages on their faces, and the man had a cast on his arm. "Oh, thank God," the woman said as she walked up to my bedside. She had tears in her eyes. The man stayed back a step. With a hand on the woman's shoulder, he said, "I told you he was a fighter. I knew you'd pull through." This isn't right. Maybe my eyes were still adjusting. No, it can't be. That doesn't sound like them either. The woman leans in to hug me and I flinch. There must be a mistake. I don't know these people. Where are my parents? "Don't be silly," the woman says while wiping the tears away from her face. "It's me, baby. It's Mom." Now I'm 100% certain these people aren't my parents. My mom would never call me baby. She hates pet names. She won't even call me Matt. It's always Matthew. I can feel the panic lump in my throat again. I begin speaking louder, almost shouting, "You're not my mom. I don't know you. Where is my mom? Where is my dad? And where is Jenny?" The woman slowly backs away. Turning her head, she looks over to the nurse. "Is he okay?" Her voice is trembling. "He doesn't recognize me." The nurse steps forward. After severe trauma, sometimes people can suffer short-term memory loss. He may be disoriented and needs some time to get his bearings. I started shouting louder, almost screaming. "I know who my parents are. They are not my parents." I pointed directly at the pair to emphasize my point. "And where is my sister? Where's Jenny?" "Sweetie, who's Jenny? You don't have a sister?" the woman said in hysterics. "Nurse, you have to do something. There must be some kind of brain damage." "Sweetie?" Again, my mother would scoff if she heard someone call me sweetie. My fight-or-flight senses are kicking in. My panic turns to rage. I start thrashing in my bed, trying to find the strength to stand up and leave this nightmare. I'm connected to too many wires and machines. I don't even know where to begin. The man is holding on to the woman in the corner. She's still crying, but I can't be bothered by it. The nurse rushes over to the bed. She's trying to calm me down, but it's no use. She hits a button in the side of the bed. In seconds, the man and woman are pushed out of the way by a group of nurses trying to restrain me. They're holding on to me and trying to keep me from hurting myself. Once they realized that I wouldn't calm down on my own, the nice nurse lady said, "We're going to have to sedate him." One of the other nurses rushed out and back with a small bottle and a syringe. They held down my leg and stuck me, injecting the fluid into me. It was warm. My arm started feeling heavy again. I was lacking the ability to speak, to fight back. Before I lost consciousness, I looked to my side and saw the man and woman again. They were standing in the doorway. The last thing I remembered seeing before everything went black was the woman's face. She was staring at me. She said nothing, but her mouth was wide open. She was smiling. Now I'm a 28-year-old man currently hiding under my covers like I'm 6. I'm petrified and completely mentally lost while holding my phone so close to my face that it's nearly touching my nose. I'm out of answers. How can this be happening? I don't know what to do at this point. I'm going to copy and paste something from my notes in the hopes that afterwards, someone can help me, can save me. The following is a recounting of events that took place 6 years ago. I never shared what happened to me with anyone even after relating it all out. But now I figure this is my last shot at salvation. Then, I'm a very light sleeper, and last night I was awoken by my bed shaking. It startled me slightly until I saw that my 13-pound black cat had jumped on the bed. I live alone. Every now and then I forget that he's sharing my apartment with me. A freeloader, of course. I quickly drifted back to sleep after giving him a few pets. My cat is a rescue. I adopted him a little over a year ago. A large black cat with big yellow and orange-colored eyes. He looked like your textbook Halloween cat. Right after I got him, I had him checked by a vet and they told me he was about 9 or 10 years old. Not an ancient cat, but closer to a middle-aged man in cat years and in good health aside from being a little hefty. "Ready for your food, Lardo?" I asked as I sat up in bed. I didn't actually name him that, though he hears Lardo Fat Man, Big Ol' Guy, or Gatto more than his actual name. I renamed him Whale after adopting him simply because that's what he is, a land whale. He didn't meow back at me and instead just trotted over to the kitchen in front of the cabinet where an endless supply of food seemed to come from every day. Whale isn't a very vocal cat. You'd see other cats that would meow back in response to their owners in person or in movies and shows. He would still make noise from time to time, but it was more of a squeak, like metal wheels on an old office chair in desperate need of some WD-40. I mean this in an endearing way, of course. His meows are almost similar to a person that has lost their voice due to being ill or from shouting too much. Not no noise, but a very faint and sharp effort of audio. I gave him half a can of his wet food and placed it in a cat bowl next to his bowl of dry food that he has access to 24/7. He doesn't always eat his wet food, but today it seemed like he was looking forward to it all night. I then made myself breakfast and laid back in bed waiting until it was time to leave. Whale hopped up on my bed looking like he wanted attention. I patted my chest to beckon him over to me. He came and stood on my chest, purring loudly. He looked at me for a second and then flopped over. He's certainly not a very graceful cat. Most cats would methodically gently lay down. He sort of just finds his spot, goes limp, and lets gravity do the rest. I usually have to put an arm up against him so that he doesn't slide off. He sprawled out across me. I finished my food and headed off to classes a few minutes later. I'm currently a first-year college student in my second semester. The fall semester just started last week. Over the summer, I was able to move into my first apartment. It's pretty small, but big enough for me and a cat. It's in a good-sized building with 16 apartments in total. I'm on the third floor, the top floor with one neighbor next to me and two neighboring apartments across the hall. The layout is the same on each floor, and there is also a subfloor with apartments as well. To give a brief description of my apartment, if you were to walk in the front door, you would already get like 75% of the tour. Since my apartment is tiny, I put my bed in the living room next to the front door as it was too big to fit comfortably in the actual bedroom. At the foot of the bed is half of an L-shaped sectional couch facing the TV on the wall. There are big windows to the right of my bed and couch that open sideways and outward like a door. There's paint smears on them and no screens, the true landlord special. I finished my classes for the day and came home in the evening to Whale laying on the exact couch cushion he was on when I left. Spread out like a damn crime scene. I've never even seen him loaf like most cats do by tucking in all of their legs when lying on their stomachs. He lifted his head and let out a big yawn, showcasing his many chipped teeth. He was a street cat before ending up at the shelter, so he had a few scars. Chipped teeth and cut-up ears from fighting other cats. Though he looks battle-worn, he's never shown an ounce of aggression. Even when getting shots at the vet, he's calm, happy actually, purring the whole time. In fact, he often purrs away just sitting next to me. He seems happy enough just being inside with a constant flow of food and attention. After setting my school stuff down, I got ready to go bowling with some friends. It was mostly heavy drinking with a side of bowling. A few hours later, I was completely sloshed and Ubered home. It took me about 15 minutes for me to get up all 3 flights of stairs, only stumbling a few times. I finally reached my apartment and went inside. I drunkenly got ready for bed after setting a couple alarms to remind me of a few online auctions for some TCG cards that I didn't want to miss out on. Tomorrow was Saturday. Thank God I don't have to get up in the morning, I said to myself in a garbled tone. I made the desperate crawl into my bed, and I felt Whale land on the bed full force. He came and laid next to me as I quickly drifted off to sleep. I woke up to an alarm and I quickly rolled over in a daze towards my nightstand to grab my phone and turn it off. It was an alarm I must have set last night for an auction, but I couldn't remember which one, and I honestly didn't care because my head felt like a cracked coconut. I rolled back over and that's when I noticed something peculiar. My front door was open. Again, having my bed in the living room gives me much more space, but it also means that I slept about 2 feet away from the only entrance to my apartment, and it was wide open. "What the hell?" I asked sleepily as I got up out of bed. I went to shut it and I realized that the deadbolt was protruding from the side of the door. I immediately figured that in my drunken stupor last night, I must have not fully closed my door before flipping the deadbolt over to lock it. I properly closed it this time and then looked around my apartment for Whale. I was guessing that he was already exploring the apartment building and had pawed open the door, causing it to be fully open, but it didn't hurt to look around first. I checked his usual hiding spots under the bed and the cabinet under the bathroom sink, and in what is supposed to be the bedroom but was now more of a PC schoolwork room. No dice. I walked out of my apartment and started checking the hallway. He wasn't on my floor. I wasn't too worried, though, because the building had a main door to get in and out, so he had to be in the complex still. I checked the second floor and still didn't find him. There is also a pet policy at this apartment that doesn't allow any pets, but almost no one follows that rule since the landlord rarely comes around. Regardless, I was hoping nobody saw my cat wandering around the building. I got to the first floor, and there he was sitting and staring at the main door. "Whale," I quietly called out to him as I approached. He didn't seem to notice me, continuing to stare outside. I don't think he even realized I was there until I picked him up. He started purring as I brought him back up to the apartment. It was as if I was holding a revving Harley. After setting him on the bed, I went to close my door. Just as I closed it, I think I saw a face. No body, just a face at about eye level. I wasn't even sure if I had seen anything. A flash of something round across the hallway from my door. I could only compare it to the little silhouettes you might see in your vision after looking away from a bright light. I chalked it up to some kind of light reflecting from the hallway window and shut my door. A few more days have passed. Not really worth mentioning. Just a mix of classes, work, and studying. Tonight I plan to just do more of the same, studying on my PC. After a few hours of reading about the social and economic conditions of America in the 1800s, I was resisting the urge to headbutt a pencil. I decided I'd call it a night. I turned off my PC and watched the screen go from blue, then cut to black. The second it turned black, I saw another face, only for a second. Not even that long. I know I saw it, though. It was right there. Actually, it wasn't. It looked more like a reflection. A reflection that was perched just above my right shoulder from where I was sitting. I spun around fast enough to give myself whiplash. Nothing. Am I hallucinating? I didn't know what to do. What was that? Confused, I walked out into the living, turned on the TV, and sat on the couch. I was trying to distract myself from thinking about what I saw when I noticed Whale. He was standing on a couch cushion with his hind legs and had his front paws resting on the windowsill. He often does this, just patrolling the area, I guess. "Keeping the neighborhood safe, big man?" I directed him. The hairs on his back shot up as he let out a low groan. It scared the shit out of me at first because I had never seen him act like this. His ears folded down onto his head, flat as a table. He kept letting out this low, furious groan. I got up to look out the window and peered down towards the ground where he was staring. I saw nothing. I closed the blinds and he stopped. He hopped down from the couch and up onto the bed. After watching YouTube for about another hour, I got into bed. Whale was already asleep towards the foot of the bed, lightly sawing logs as he did. I scooted next to him and fell asleep. In the morning, I awoke to another uncanny sight. There's no way, I said aloud. I shot up in bed, my door was open. I know damn well that I shut it properly yesterday. There was no alcohol in my system last night to rationalize this with. I did not leave my door open. I got out of bed and already knew I would have to track down my cat again. He wasn't on any of the first 3 floors, so I took another set of stairs down to the subfloor. He wasn't there either. I heard scratching on a door somewhere on the floor above me. I went back up to the main level and there he was, scratching at the main door from the outside. He must have slipped out when somebody else left the building. It was cold out by now and I felt so bad that he was stuck outside. I opened the door and picked him up. He wasn't cold, so at least he hadn't been out there very long. I brought him back to the apartment and then got ready for classes. After class, Sarah came home with me. Sarah was a girl in my chemistry class that I had been talking to for a little while over the summer. She'd been over a few times previously and had met Whale before. He never gave her much attention, but seemed fine with her. Today, Whale came right up to her and brushed against her leg in greeting. "Must have missed me, huh?" she said to him. "He's just hoping you'll give him food," I said jokingly. Sarah and I hadn't made ourselves an official couple, but we definitely enjoyed each other's company. We had some food delivered and then started watching a movie. We made it about 10 minutes into the movie before she put her hand on my thigh and said, "Do you want to, smooth?" I replied to pick on her a little bit. She scoffed. Sarah leaned in to kiss me as the movie quickly became background noise. As we were fooling around, I swear I saw another face just briefly. I stopped. It didn't look the same as the previous face I've glimpsed. It looked like a woman's face, I think. and it was also closer when I saw it than the other. It had been right behind Sarah's head, almost peeking at me from behind her through Sarah's hair. Per usual, as soon as I registered it in my mind, it was gone. I still wasn't able to make out any specific characteristics of it. "Hey, are you okay?" Sarah asked in concern. Yeah, I'm okay. I just got something in my eye, I think." I didn't want to ruin the moment over something I wasn't even sure I had actually seen. As we continued to fool around, I would occasionally look down towards the couch and see Whale perched on the back of it with his ears all the way down, not making any noise. I thought he was staring at us, but he seemed to be looking at me directly. I tried not to let it bother me, and I was now making a conscious effort to focus on the task at hand instead of the oddly judgmental cat. When we were done, we finished the movie, and then Sarah had to leave. I was hoping she would stay the night, but I knew she had early classes in the morning. I was alone again. When I moved into this apartment, I enjoyed the noise of the city and the commotion of all my neighbors. Some might find it annoying, and at times my neighbors could be, but the noise made me feel less alone. Now, though, I felt alone again, suddenly more aware of my surroundings and the shadowed areas of my apartment. Before going to bed, I slid a box of books I still hadn't unpacked in front of the door. I'm not tracking down my cat again because my door magically opens when it wants to. Maybe I started sleepwalking. I'd never sleepwalked before, but how would I know now that I'm living alone? I then got into bed and went to sleep. At around 2 a.m., I woke up with an uncomfortable, warm feeling in my stomach. I knew what this meant. The Taco Bell I ordered earlier came back to haunt me. I made a sleepy stride to the bathroom. I was glad Sarah wasn't here to listen to the intestinal war crimes I was experiencing. As I was in there punishing porcelain, I heard a harsh scratch on the bathroom door. It made me jump. Whale would scratch at the door now and then when I had the bathroom door closed. This sounded like there was anger behind it, though, like he was pissed at me for some reason. He scratched again. I don't know why, but I felt kind of afraid. I was in a pretty compromising situation to be dealing with anything. Another few scratches at the door. The scratches weren't stopping. He was scratching so violently that the door was shaking in its frame. I tried not to make a sound. It was getting so loud that I was worried my next-door neighbor was going to come knock on my door. I finished my business as fast as I could and threw the bathroom door open. As I had twisted the doorknob, the scratching stopped. I looked at the ground before me, and Whale wasn't there. I checked the outer side of the door, and there were no scratch marks. Did I imagine the whole thing? After settling myself mentally, I went back to my bed. Whale was laying at the foot of the bed, asleep. "Is this what food poisoning is?" I said in my head. Exhausted and confused, I fell back asleep. I woke up again later, choking for air. I opened my eyes and all I could see was black. I felt fur in my face and in my mouth. My fat-ass cat was fucking suffocating me. I tried to move him and he wouldn't budge. 13 pounds now felt like 13 tons. I still was staring into darkness as my chest felt heavier and heavier from the lack of oxygen. The darkness was suddenly broken by 2 orange and yellow orbs peering back at me, no, through me. "Get the fuck off of me," I said, finally managing to roll him off my face as light flooded my vision. It was early morning, and the light coming from the window was harsh on my eyes. I sat up as fast as I could against my headboard and just squinted at him while my eyes adjusted to the light. I was pissed off and terrified. He didn't look back at me and hopped off of the bed. Did he mean to do that? I wondered. Nothing like this had ever happened before. As I went to feed him before leaving for classes, I examined him more closely. Maybe I had grabbed a random cat off the street that was trying to get into our building. He sat patiently at my feet, waiting for me to scoop his wet food into his bowl. He was as still as a statue while I looked at his ears. There were indeed little cuts. I went to check his teeth. I put my finger against his mouth gently and raised his upper lip. He didn't seem bothered by my prodding and was keeping eye contact with me the whole time, which was off-putting. Yep, there were definitely pieces of his teeth missing. It was him. I put his food down for him to eat, and for a second he didn't move and just kept looking at me. It was only a moment or two longer than what would have felt natural for him, but it was notable. I went to leave for classes when I noticed that I couldn't see my doorknob. "You've got to be kidding me," I said aloud. I was getting a migraine. I knew I had to skip classes, and I called out of work before it got worse. I used to get these migraines much more frequently in high school, a few times a month. Now, though, I would only get maybe 2 a year, but these things are debilitating. It usually starts with a lapse in my vision, An example is if I hold my hand out in front of my face, a couple of my fingers will seem to be missing. They're still there, obviously, but all I can see in their place is a swirling, distracting rift in my vision, even if I close my eyes. This is followed by numbness in my mouth, tongue, and sometimes one of my hands. The back of my neck will ache unbearably, and the nausea usually sets in soon after. They normally don't go away until I finally vomit a few times. It's like my brain is resetting itself. During this, every one of my senses feels like an affront to God. Nothing tastes good, feels good, smells good, and any bright light feels as if it's melting my brain. Sometimes I get lucky and they only last about 30 minutes, but I've had them last 8 hours before. It had been a long time since my last one, so I figured I was in it for the long haul. I texted Sarah that I wouldn't be in chemistry today, which took a while because I couldn't look directly at my keyboard. I had to use my peripheral vision in order to type the right letters. It takes so long to type anything in that condition. I got a glass of water, curled up on the couch, and tried to fall asleep before the worst of it set in. Meow. Meow. I heard 2 perfect cat meows just a few moments later. I hated even hearing the noise. Meow. I sat up in my agony and looked around for Whale. I could see his tail flopping on the bed. I couldn't see the rest of him because of my migraine, but he was there. I heard another meow. This time it was far behind me. Meow. 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 More perfect meows seemingly coming from my PC room. I was so fed up with the noise that I decided to get up and try to investigate. My vision was definitely worsening, which was not helping my efforts, and all the other symptoms were now in full force. There was light coming into my PC room from the window there. I had to squint in order to not fry my retinas. I heard another piercing meow. It sounded like it was coming from directly in front of me, but as far as I could tell, there wasn't anything there. I stood there for a few minutes waiting to hear it again, but it never returned. By this point, my mouth was gradually starting to fill with saliva. I knew the inevitable toilet bowl hugging was near. I turned to leave my PC room and head to the bathroom when I stopped in my tracks. My abrupt stop almost made me throw up right there, but vomiting wasn't even on my mind now. In the doorway, I saw another face about 2 feet away from me, only this time it didn't disappear. Up until now, these faces would appear and fade away again faster than I could blink. I couldn't fully see it, as the swirling rift in my vision was twirling like crazy, but I could make out the shape. Cheekbones, a jawline, and hair at the edge of my vision impediment. From what I could see, it had dark, short hair, pale skin, and a fairly bony structure. I looked away from it slightly to try and get it into my peripheral. It had eyes that appeared to be larger than they should have been for a person. Not balloon-sized, but closer to golf balls. I couldn't see what color, but they were definitely dark. It was a man's face with a sad expression. Frowning like it had just seen the saddest thing in its entire existence. Then it started moving in closer, bobbing up and down as if the rest of its body was there too, and I just couldn't see it. Not a single sound came from its motion. Fear would have been a welcome emotion in that moment compared to what I was feeling. Fear was part of it, but also pain, nausea, frustration, and desperation. I wanted to back into a corner and cower. I wanted to cry, to vomit. I wanted to shout at it. I was so done with this entire experience. In my mind, I said, if I gotta eat shit, I guess it's best not to nibble. I swung my fist at it. Pain shot up my arm through my hand like an electric eel. I had hit the door frame. It didn't feel broken at least, and the face was gone. My stomach decided that was enough movement, and my mouth filled with saliva again. I made a mad dash towards the bathroom, more of a pitiful stupor, bouncing off of the walls that I could barely see in front of me. As I ran into the bathroom, I slammed the door behind me and locked it. I hovered over the toilet and my system purged. After 5 or 6 retches, I passed out on the bathroom floor. I woke up maybe an hour later. I didn't really know how long I was unconscious, but it was still light out. I guessed it was mid-afternoon. I stood up slowly and looked out the bathroom window. It was snowing gently outside. My neck still hurt, but every other symptom was gone. One thing about the migraines I get, afterwards I usually feel almost physically euphoric. If it wasn't always for the residual neck pain, I could run a marathon. I turned to leave my bathroom and I saw the door fully open. I didn't even care at this point. Hell, I felt like sarcastically saying, "Thanks for opening the door for me, whatever you are." I got some more water and a granola bar to slowly refill my now emptied stomach. I sat on the couch and looked over at the bed. Whale was there, sleeping on my pillow. I just stayed there for probably another hour watching the snow fall outside the living room window. It was calming, grounding even. A blaring sound flooded my head that sent me reeling. My phone screen was on. It was one of my damn auction alarms. I checked it just quickly enough to see that I was way too poor to be spending that much money on some cardboard cards. Once my head stopped ringing, I figured I would put a little effort into solving the source of the meowing since it was certainly not Whale earlier. As I left my apartment, I glanced over at my cat. He lifted his head just enough to shoot me an annoyed look. "Oh, did I wake you?" I mocked. I went to my next-door neighbor and asked if she had a cat. I tried to assure her that I wasn't some cat narc, but I don't know how much that helped. She said she didn't have a cat, so I went to the apartment below mine to ask them. The man said he didn't have a cat either, so I was out of luck for any rational explanation. I'm sure my appearance didn't help. Messed up hair, color-drained face from vomiting, and a clearly bruised hand. I figured my efforts were futile, so I went back to my apartment and iced my hand. I wasn't sleeping tonight. Tomorrow was Saturday again, and I didn't have any plans. I just wanted to get to tomorrow and then maybe figure out some kind of solution. It's not like I could afford to move again. It was dark out now, almost midnight. I had YouTube on in the background, but I wasn't paying attention. I mostly just put it on so that if I heard any meows, I could chalk it up to an ad as I scrolled on my phone to stay awake. I was fully sucked into TikTok when my TV turned off. I forgot that it has an automatic shut-off timer, and it had been a long time since I pushed any buttons. Darkness enveloped my apartment. The only light has been coming from my TV and my phone. I knew the TV remote was somewhere on my couch. I got up out of bed to go get it after turning on my phone's flashlight. My eyes were still adjusting to the darkness, so as I hovered over my couch, I put a hand on the back of it and pointed my flashlight at the cushion. The remote was right where I left it. As I grabbed it, I felt a wet sensation go across my hand that was still on the back of the couch for balance. Something wet and rough like sandpaper. I instantly pulled my hand away. I thought it was my cat, I wish it was. There was a face leering at me from behind the couch. This one didn't fade away. It was a child's face. A boy, I think, with a depressingly sad frown on its face. It was looking up at me with eyes of desperation. Those eyes, they were totally black. Not a drop of white anywhere in them. These eyes were golf ball sized as well. Its frowning mouth very slightly began to open, almost as if to cry. There was no crying noise, though, just a quiet meow. This didn't sound like the perfect cat meows I had heard previously, though. More like what would be expected from the face that was staring at me. Like a sad child being forced to say meow in a choked-up tone. My hands were shaking. I dropped my phone. First, dropped my phone. My only light source, now swallowed up between couch cushions. I frantically plunged my hands into the cushion crevice. Meow, I heard again. It was even closer this time. Meow, right behind my ear. I found my phone and pointed my light where the sound came from. There was no face anymore. What the fuck, I muttered, just barely loud enough for myself to hear. Did that thing just lick me? I turned the TV on again and sat on the bed. Whale was nowhere to be seen at the moment. I was hoping for some kind of comfort, but I wasn't about to go walking through the apartment looking for him. I put on a movie and sat up in bed watching it. Not long later, my head felt heavy and my eyelids kept lowering like a garage door. A few minutes of hopeless head bobbing and I fell asleep. I began to dream. It was like none other I had experienced before. It was very vivid. The dream took place in my apartment. The point of view was from the perspective of myself laying in bed. I stayed put, continuing to scan the room. To the left of the bed, a little ways away from the door, I noticed something that I couldn't recognize at first. There was a man standing next to the bed. He was staring at me. His face was different from the faces that had been haunting me, though. Short, blonde, well-kept hair with regular human eyes that were a yellowish-orange color. His mouth showed no expression. He looked rather generic, very tall, though. Had to be about 6 feet 5 inches and was very scrawny, like his skin was vacuum-sealed onto a bone frame. He wasn't wearing any clothes but appeared featureless from the waist down. His right arm was extended with a punitive finger towards me. I didn't move. The man's mouth opened just enough to let noise escape. He kept making that noise as his bottom jaw lowered and the sound grew gradually louder, going up and down in pitch and tone. At this point, his bottom jaw dropped lower than any person's possibly could. His chin was now down to the middle of his chest. Fwhip. A sound resembling what you might hear when trying to whip a friend with a wet rag but miss your target. The man's lips receded back into his body, exposing his teeth. The teeth themselves were normal, but now separated. There were huge gaps in between each tooth on his lower jaw due to the stretching. "Lull," he continued. He stopped pointing at me with his right hand and clasped his hands together with a soft clap. Using his right hand, he started to twist his left wrist. Twisting and twisting. I could see the skin around his elbow start to buckle and tear. The man continued his vocalizations as he separated his elbow from its socket. Sounded like a large carrot being snapped in half. Dark blood began to flow from the jagged stump. I turned to look away. "Look at me!" It boomed in a deep voice, deeper than the lowest pit of hell. My head snapped back and held his gaze as he took the now severed arm and placed it against his stomach. The sharp ends of the ulna and radius were jutting from what little muscle and skin were on the arm. I watched as he dragged the bone fragments across his stomach like scissors flowing through wrapping paper. Blood and guts began to spill out into the ground with various squishes and plops. He tossed his amputated arm and hit the wall behind me, but I still didn't dare move. He raised his remaining arm up to his mouth. "Kak gelch onga." He was plunging as much of his arm as he physically could down his throat. The sound of wet macaroni and cheese being stirred filled my ears. I watched as more dark blood and organs escaped the gash on his stomach. Hack, ratch. It sounded like he was dry heaving. Then I saw fingernails beginning to protrude from the hole. They inched their way further and rotated enough to grab the top section of skin and flesh atop the slash. He began pulling upwards on it as if to turn himself inside out. At that moment, the point of view of my dream changed. I was now looking at myself laying in bed. I had tears running down my face, but I wasn't blinking or making a sound. My new perspective got lower and lower to the ground. I could still hear the previous events I just witnessed unfolding. More squishes, retches, and flops. "I'll let you wake up now before I change my mind," I heard a voice say in a similar tone as before, calm yet stern. I shot straight up in my bed, sweating so profusely I thought I had somehow spilled water all over myself. I was hyperventilating as I wiped stinging sweat from my eyes. It took me a moment to process what I had just dreamt. I looked to where I had seen the man standing. There was no man, but instead, Whale, sitting motionless, staring at me. I let myself fall back onto my pillow while I tried to catch my breath. I felt the bed jolt as Whale hopped onto the bed. I wiped more sweat from my eyes just in time to witness him dead sprint from the edge of my bed and onto my chest. He sat down perfectly as if he'd practiced how to properly perch like a cat. I froze. He looked at me with his piercing eyes. He wasn't purring or making any sound at all. He started flopping his tail from left to right. Flop, flop, flop. His eyes seemed to be losing color but also getting slightly larger. The rate of his tail flopping increased and he moved a tiny bit closer to my face. Flop, flop, flop. His eyes grew larger still and were now completely devoid of any light. Flop, 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 flop. His tail kept going at this constant speed like a pendulum. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. I didn't even feel like I was breathing. He had me in some kind of hypnosis. He was so close now that I felt his whiskers on my face. I could barely see any of his head at this point, just his bulbous eyes. I was staring into the abyss and the abyss was upon me. After a short moment, I thought I saw a flicker of light somewhere deep within. Like the message cube in a magic 8-ball after you shake it and look into the viewing window for the answer to your question. Finally, I saw my mother within it. She looked distraught and tired like she had been running from something or someone. Everything around her was blacked out, but she was interacting with her environment that I couldn't see, clamoring over obstacles. Then something hit her in the head, right in the face. Her whole skull bounced off of what was presumably a wall behind her after being struck. She dropped to the ground. Her nose was flattened and flowing like a faucet with blood. She looked upwards at what I guessed was her attacker, but she was looking right at me. Another blow to the head and teeth went flying. She was still alive, though, sputtering and choking on her own blood and tooth fragments. Another blow to her head, and I saw the light in her slightly popped-out eyes fade away. She was dead. There was still blow after blow as the image faded out. I still couldn't move. Another spark of light within the cat's eyes. This time I saw myself. I was hanging upside down by my feet and was half naked. Like in the last image, all background imagery was blacked out. The skin on my arms had been peeled down to my wrists very surgically. The flaps of skin were hanging on just barely. I watched as something struck my throat and crumpled my trachea. I saw myself struggling to bring in air, but it quickly was nothing more than a death rattle. The display faded to black again. Another spark this time. It was Sarah. She was hanging from chains connected to all four limbs, suspected horizontally, probably just off the ground. I watched in utter horror as she was... I can't. I won't describe Sarah's. That image couldn't have faded fast enough. I was trying so hard to move anything at all. I had never experienced sleep paralysis, but if this is what it's like, hell couldn't be far off. Another spark of light started up, but I was able to slightly make my eyes quiver away just barely. This hypnotic trance of tail flopping was impossible to break. It demanded all of my focus and attention. It must have noticed my eyes wavering. If you look away now, you will damn them all. It was the same voice as before, but it sounded echoey, and the volume raised and dropped as it spoke. Look away now, and you're mine for eternity, my pet. My face, mine. Their suffering will be your suffering, and I'll be sure to let them know where to place the blame. The cat moved close enough to my face for me to feel its wet nose against mine. Beep, beep, beep. An auction alarm. The noise broke my hopeless trance as I whipped my head towards my phone. What I did next is going to sound cruel, but I acted before I could even process what I was doing. I grabbed him. I held it so tightly against my chest that I could feel bones in this little cat body shift and move out of place. I stood with him still pinned to my chest. His giant eyes pressed against me like water balloons. It let out a loud shriek. It was a mix of human and feline sound. I took one single bound towards my window, opened it, and threw him as hard as I could down towards the ground. From 3 floors up, I heard every bone in his body snap and crunch. He laid flat, not moving, with his legs bent in various directions and a twisted spine. I turned off my alarm that was still going as I watched. I didn't know what to expect. The body started twitching and shifting. I watched as whatever it was slither off like a snake through an inch of fresh snow. I didn't take my eyes off of it until it disappeared into the distance. I just stood there with the window open for what felt like an hour. After I came to, I called my mom. It was about 3:30 a.m., but she works a night shift and I figured she'd be awake. After a few long, agonizing rings, the line clicked. "Hi, honey," she answered. It took everything not to break down crying at the sound of her voice. "Hello?" "Hi, Mom. Sorry. I was just up late working on some school stuff and wanted to check in." I couldn't tell her what had just happened. What would I even say? "Hey, Mom, my cat went fucking insane and there's been faces haunting me. Oh, yeah. And I saw you get beat to death." She told me about her job working at the hospital, and I told her about my classes and how they were going. We talked for about 20 minutes, and then she had to go back to work. I texted Sarah. "Hey, are you up?" I got no reply, but didn't give it too much thought, as it was now almost 4 in the morning. I knew she liked to get up at 5 a.m. to go on a run, so I just sat in silence, in the dark of my apartment, and waited. An hour later, my phone buzzed. "You're up early," she replied. "Up late, actually. I'm getting ready for my run, but we should get lunch today." We set a time for lunch, and by now the sun was coming up. The warmth of the sun's rays never felt so comforting. I decided to put on pants, shoes, and a coat to go on a drive around the city to clear my head. I didn't want to be in that apartment, at least for a little while. I walked downstairs and out of the main entrance door. I looked below my window and I could see the serpentine trail in the snow left by that thing. I took a picture of it. I knew this wouldn't really serve as concrete evidence if I ever told anyone what happened, but it was evidence enough for me. I didn't drive for very long. I was exhausted at this point, so I pulled into a grocery store parking lot, set an alarm for noon, and fell asleep. I didn't dream at all. I was honestly grateful for that. I awoke in my car to my alarm with enough time to make it to lunch with Sarah. We got lunch on campus and just talked. Well, she talked. A lot. I mostly just nodded and smiled whenever it seemed appropriate. I was happy enough hearing her voice. All I heard was a sweet blah 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 blah. She went back to finish classes for the day, and I headed home. I parked my car and walked to my building. I stopped in my tracks. A large black cat was sprawled out across the bottom step leading up to the door. He lifted his head up and saw me. I still didn't move. He lazily got up and trotted over to me and brushed against my leg. I was mortified until I heard a little squeak. Whale's little squeak, something I hadn't heard in so very long. I knew then that this was my cat, my boy, my whale. Now if you've made it this far, then you're mostly caught up. I was left with so many questions. What was that thing? Why me? Was it bluffing when it said to not look away? Where had Whale gone that whole time? Sarah and I moved into our own apartment together a few years ago, just me, her, and Whale. We haven't gotten any other pets. Whale has plenty enough heart for the both of us. After those events, he lived another 6 years. Nothing else supernatural ever happened. He lived a good life. Sarah and I made the hard decision to have him put down this morning. He was an old man now and had a lot of health complications that old cats do. It was one of the saddest experiences I've ever been through. I've been to funerals that were less sad. He purred away as the vet gave him the injection. He paid it no attention and just kept purring until his little engine stopped revving. It's been a sad day for Sarah and I. We've just been reminiscing about our little lard ass and looking through pictures of him. I write all this to tell you that a few minutes ago I felt my cat jump on my bed. I was never big on dating apps, but loneliness can make you do things you wouldn't normally do. After another night of eating dinner alone, I downloaded one of those trending dating apps. It felt stupid at first, swiping left, swiping right, judging people based on a handful of pictures and a few words. But after a while, it became mechanical, almost hypnotic. Then I matched with Claire. She had only one picture, a black and white shot of her smiling, long, dark hair falling over one shoulder, deep green eyes staring directly into the camera. Her bio was short, looking for something real. Something about her expression drew me in. It wasn't the forced, filtered perfection of most profiles. She looked real. We started chatting right away. She asked me deep, personal questions almost immediately. What scares you the most? What's your worst memory? Do you believe in fate? I answered, drawn in by how engaged she seemed. I asked her the same, but she avoided answering, always shifting the conversation back to me. I should have thought it was strange, but I didn't. I was too flattered by the attention. After a few days, she asked me to meet in person. I'd love to see you, she wrote. Meet me at 8 p.m. at the Lantern Cafe. I hesitated. I'd never heard of it before. When I searched, I found almost nothing. Just an old listing with no recent reviews. The address put it on the outskirts of town in a part I didn't go to often, but against my better judgment, I agreed. That night, I drove out to the cafe. The area was mostly deserted, just a few scattered streetlights flickering weakly. The Lantern Cafe was a small, rundown place with a dimly lit neon sign that barely buzzed to life. When I got to the door, my stomach twisted. The sign read closed, but the lights inside were still on. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, the door swung open with a soft creak. Inside, the place was dead silent. No barista, no customers. Just the hum of the old ceiling fan and the faint smell of stale coffee and dust. Then I saw her. She was sitting alone at a corner table, completely still. Claire looked exactly like her picture. Same long dark hair, same green eyes. But something was off. Her posture was too rigid, her expression vacant. It was as if she wasn't looking at me, but through me. "Claire?" I asked, my voice unsteady. She smiled, but something about it wasn't right. It was too slow, like she was mimicking an expression rather than making one. "I was waiting for you," she said. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around my phone. Something about this felt wrong, like a dream that was about to turn into a nightmare. I glanced down and pulled up the dating app. I wanted to check our messages to ground myself. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but her profile was gone, no match, no messages, no trace that she had ever existed. A cold shiver ran down my spine. "You won't find me," Claire said softly. I looked up, my throat dry. "Why not?" Her smile widened, too wide, "Because I don't exist." The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I took a step back. This is a joke, right?" She tilted her head, and for the first time her eyes truly met mine. "You swiped right on something you shouldn't have." The cafe lights flickered. The door behind me slammed shut on its own. I turned to run, but the moment my hand touched the door handle, everything went black. I woke up in my apartment. I had no memory of getting home. My phone was lying on my chest, the screen dark. My head throbbed. The The first thing I did was open the dating app. Claire's profile wasn't just gone, our entire conversation had vanished. It was as if she had never existed. I checked my texts, my call history, nothing. But then I noticed something. There was a new picture saved in my gallery. A black and white photo of me sitting alone in the empty cafe, staring at the camera, smiling.